If you've never been lonely, you don't realise what it is like.
It feels as though you've been dumped in the deep end and there's nobody there to rescue you.
Well, you go hours and hours, never speak to anybody.
I don't think you'll ever get used to it. You know, it's always loneliness.
How do you measure loneliness when even trying to talk about it takes your breath away?
The room's just empty.
"91-year-old Margaret Nicholas has lived in this house virtually her whole life, first with her parents, then her husband and family. 2 years ago her husband died. Now it's just her.
We used to do the garden together, do our shopping together, everything was done together.
But you obviously miss him.
I do.
Margaret's granddaughter takes her shopping and neighbours pop in to check she's okay, but it's everyday company she misses.
Some people would think me a bit odd, but I do chatter to my husband. I do it so I'm sort of, speaking.
That's the wife with a cousin.
Roy Croucher lives a short drive away. He and Margaret have loneliness in common. He lost his only son to cancer and then his wife of 50 years.
I'm always hoping that the wife will come through the door, which she never will. If you go out, you come back, and you come back to an empty house, and it's loneliness again. And you're always waiting for somebody to call.
Roy says he's lucky. A friend and her family see him most weeks. But like Margaret, some days the only voice he'll hear is a call from a phone befriending service run by volunteers.
Judy rings up on a Saturday night, because last Saturday she was the first person I spoke to all day.
And that's a long day.
It is a long day.
And how much difference has that made, that phone call that comes on Saturday night when you haven't spoken to anyone else all day?
Well, I always look forward to it. I always put that phone on that seat, ready to pick it up. And that's a great help.
The campaign to end loneliness says it should now be treated as a public health issue. Identifying the most vulnerable is critical, then offering support to cope with the bewildering and painful reality of ending up alone.
I've never been on my own ever before. No.
And so getting used to that has been hard.
It has. I don't think I'll ever get really used to it.
It's just something that is thrown at you, and you can't throw it back to anybody. You've got to just carry on.
The reason there's some excellent videos out of the UK is in the UK they have a whole government service oriented towards loneliness, and they recognize the reality of loneliness. So they set up a whole government department around the year 2011 or so. And so when you're looking for videos on loneliness, you'll find that there's a couple in the US. There's little things minor things out of Canada, and then the UK has a whole program. So that was one of the videos that come out of the UK that's quite excellent. And I'm going to give, so right now I'm going to give you a sort of a quick PowerPoint about the direction as to why we're concerned about this whole issue of visiting and loneliness. Caring for our own is a very important focus, especially if you're someone like myself who's concerned about issues like euthanasia and assisted suicide. And I refer to this as like as a culture of abandonment that's associated with this assisted death. And I talk about how we can change this culture of abandonment through how we care for others. So it's very important. It is essential that people who feel that their life lacks value or purpose, or feel that no one cares about them, it's important that we offer them purpose, support, and genuine hope from their significant community. And notice the people in the video who are lonely, that someone calling was very important to them. The answer is to care and to be with others in the journey through their difficult times. So a recent study in Denmark showed that, and this was a study done on people who had a heart attack. And so what they did is they followed them, and the health service followed them, and they did questioning, they looked at their health records, etc. And they found that people who had a heart attack, the women who described themselves as lonely, were 3 times more likely to die within a year of a heart attack than those who had an active social life. And men who described themselves as lonely were twice as likely to die within a year. Patients who are lonely were also 3 times more likely to be anxious, depressed, and they reported a lower quality of life. And this is done by the service in the UK. They did a survey of 1,896 seniors, 65 and older. 22% said they have a conversation with no more than 3 people over the span of a week. Now, of course, with the recent COVID pandemic, I would assume that that data would even be worse than that. A quarter of the older adults said it makes them feel good when someone smiles or acknowledges them while waiting in a line at a place like the bank or a grocery store. 1 in 5 would be thrilled if someone stopped to ask them how their day had gone. These are just important sort of facts, and this is out of the UK, this data, but I don't think it'd be all that different than Canada. According to the US Census Bureau, and this is just a couple years ago, there was 12.5 million older adults who lived in a 1-person household, and that represented 28% of people aged 65 or older. The national poll that I'm referring to was done by the American Association of Retired Persons, and it found that 1 in 3 seniors were lonely. The research shows that chronic loneliness can impact older people's memory, their physical well-being, their mental health, and their life expectancy. Now, we already can see that because we also saw from the Denmark study the life expectancy of someone who was lonely after having a heart attack. More than 1/3 of the seniors in the poll said they felt a lack of companionship, and almost 30% said they socialized with friends and neighbors or family once a week or less. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of Catholic Women's League ladies on this presentation today, and you'll notice that obviously going to church would be a great advantage, because if you go to church, you're obviously socializing, or if you have a church community you're connected to, you'd obviously be more likely to be socializing within a week. When euthanasia was legalized in Canada, many people thought it would be only impacting a few people. In Canada, there was 5,631 assisted deaths in 2019, 7,595 in 2020. And based on the data out of Ontario, because we don't have federal data, it doesn't come out. The federal government is very slow, but based on the recent Ontario data that came out, I'm saying that there was probably around 10,000 euthanasia deaths in 2021 in Canada. From June 17th to December 31st, there were 9,796 in Ontario alone. And just to give you the data, 9,794 were euthanasia, meaning that the doctor or nurse did the act, and 2 of them were assisted suicide, where the doctor or the nurse prescribed those lethal drugs and the person did it themselves. To make it even more concerning, though, the second half of this year, of 2021, 39% increase in assisted deaths in Ontario. So that is actually a factor of it actually sort of going way up. Now, the reason for that, I think, had to do with the fact that the new legislation in March of last year passed, Bill C7, which really expanded the scope of euthanasia in Canada. So why do people ask for euthanasia? And this is one of the reasons we have this program. We're told that people ask for euthanasia because they're pain or suffering, but the data suggests that very few people are asking for death for these reasons. There are some people who are radical autonomists. You know, it's, I want this. This is the way I want to live my life. There's very few of those, actually. Very few. The data shows very few of those. Most people ask for death because they are at a difficult time of their life. They feel lonely, depressed, socially isolated. They've lost hope or purpose in their life. Obviously, they probably have a health condition. I'm not assuming they're not. And this is a very recent study that came out in February of last year. An Irish study was conducted over a 6-year period, so it was a substantial study. followed 8,174 people over the age of 50. So it's a very substantial study. 3.5% of those people had a wish to die. So you'd say, well, that's pretty low. And that, but anyway, the point was those who had a wish to die, 72% were identified as lonely, and 60% were identified as having significant depressive symptoms. Now, because the study was done over a 6-year period, some of these people, and that's a whole thing I've written up about it, some of those people were interviewed 3 times because, they would have been interviewed on a 2-year intervals, which the study was doing. And some of those, most of those people who had a wish to die in the first part of that study, when they're interviewed the second time, most of them actually had changed their mind. This whole thing about the will to live, how it fluctuates. Nonetheless, the data is saying 72% were identified. If someone had a wish to die, 72% were identified as lonely, 60% had significant depressive symptoms. That continued to be very consistent throughout. We need a culture that cares, not one that kills. Euthanasia threatens my life. You might say, how would this threaten my life, though? I'm concerned about my neighbors. Yes, okay. How would this threaten my life? Human experience tells us that it's normal for a person who is experiencing serious illness or personal difficulties and loneliness will fear for their future, will question their purpose for living, or experience existential distress or situational depression or lose hope. So maybe they're asking for death because of their health condition. That could very well be the case, but there are other precipitating reasons for actually why they're asking for death. And most often it's related to this feeling of loss of hope, depression, or as I say, loneliness, etc. Suffering alone, as we know, loneliness, isolation, depression, loss of hope is far more difficult than loneliness, than suffering with people caring for you. Suffering alone is a serious problem, and our culture has become a culture of abandonment, sadly. We need to help people find hope and purpose in their life. And being with somebody helps them find little hopes, little purposes throughout their life. Being with others makes a difference, and that difference can help protect people from euthanasia and assisted suicide. And the Compassion Community Care is a charity, and it was created to help people with difficult health conditions and to provide training for people to visit those who are living with loneliness and social isolation. It actually also has another program that it's developed now, but we can get into that later. I always tell people we can change the world one person at a time. We can protect people by caring, meaning we know people in our lives, we can care, and we can make a difference to those people in our life. By visiting, journeying with, being with, and caring for others, we affirm a person's purpose for living. We reduce their loneliness and isolation. We help them find a way through their depression and isolation and loneliness, and we allay their fear of suffering. I'm assuming most people on this call, because of those who have joined us, are believers. God created us to be with others. If you're not a believer, you've evolved to be with others. That's how you evolved to be then. Nonetheless, I believe God created us to be with others. We are interconnected in our nature as human beings. It is essential to the human person to be with others. We are affected by the legalization of euthanasia because all of us experience these similar human emotions and feelings. So, Alex, he's a bit of an up personality. Those who know me would say, well, he smiles a lot, that kind of stuff. But anyway, the point of it is that we all experience these same feelings to a different degree, but we all experience the emotions in a similar human manner. Cultural loneliness affects our health, it affects our quality of life, and it can be a threat to our life, especially now that euthanasia is legal. I can get into a few stories with you, but I will during the presentation, not now. We're focusing on visiting the lonely and caring for our own, the members of our parish, our community, people we know. It is our goal to replace the culture of death with the culture of care. The whole concept of compassionate community care comes up with the fact that we recognize the nature of the human person, but we also look at the question of how do we protect our own, those people who we know in our lives, those people who are connected to us now that assisted death, euthanasia, assisted suicide are legal. And there's some information about compassionate community care.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was a wonderful introduction and great segue into why we visit. So our philosophy of why we visit ultimately is really key here. And ultimately, we want to ensure that when we visit with people, we are valuing them, we appreciate them, and we ensure that we are there for them. So that's really key here. We want to emphasize that when you visit with someone, it makes a huge difference. And it does matter to them because they're feeling heard, they're feeling valued, appreciated, and most importantly, they're spending time being with you. In return, you are you know, giving your attention to them, and you are able to really transform their day. If not just their, you know, just that hour or that time that you're spending, you are going to be affecting the rest of their day, potentially even that week. As Alex showed, there's sometimes people who are so lonely, so withdrawn, so shut in and isolated, that that connection that you have with them, that you're visiting, that particular appointment may make the difference between, you know, them having a visitor all week even. So this is really crucial, and what you're doing is very important. So we thank you all for joining us for this training, and look forward to hearing from you once you've completed the actual training with the story and the actual workbooks. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Alex. Perfect. So why we visit, there's oftentimes this issue of, you know, this lack of companionship. We do want to make sure that people who are lonely feel that they are being heard. And oftentimes, you know, if you don't make that initial phone call, you don't start that conversation, you don't engage with them, they will not have that opportunity, maybe potentially with someone else. So they do feel, oftentimes when we speak to people, we interview them, they feel a strong sense of isolation. Even people, you know, you may experience this, have this actual feeling. And this happens with people, you know, in my age. I've just picked up the phone recently to my girlfriend. I haven't spoken to her for a few months during COVID, and we usually connect every 2-3 months, you know, and she said, you know, I feel really separated from people. And this is a woman who's in her 30s, and she has a family of 4 kids, a husband, and she still feels isolated. So how much more do people who are shut in or shut out necessarily when they're in a nursing home or a facility feel isolated even more so when things like this happen? And especially during these lockdowns, we heard from Alex that oftentimes this can happen too, that when the lockdown happens, we've heard quotes of people saying, you know, I'd rather die than go into another lockdown. So this is why caring for our own is so crucial and important. Also, when we visit, we are going to be able to be ambassadors. And if you are part of CWL, we want to encourage you to complete you know, whatever training they offer too, and ensure that you have something visible that shows that you're representing them. And also, because you've completed this training, you are actually going to be in a position to see and notice signs of any kind of abuse or neglect. And sometimes that may come across as, for example, you know, bruises some people will experience, or there's some, you know, just differences in their physical appearance. They might feel, you know, more timid or shy. They might feel more vulnerable to you. They might even share about abuse, what's happening to them. So definitely please take that to consideration, that that may happen. As you come across and meet with more people, the statistics show that there may be actually higher chances of abuse occurring. It could also be financial abuse. So elder abuse can be quite common. So just be aware of that when you do start this, you know, process of visitation with people. And, you know, just keep in mind that you can actually alleviate a lot of that strain and stress. So you're part of the solution in every way. So if it's abuse, or if it's neglect, or even it's just simply feeling of depression starting with someone slowly, you're part of this hope and this solution that's coming to these people. And that's why it's so crucial what you're doing. So thank you for doing that. And so when we're talking about our human needs, it's really key to have this book. And I love this book because with CCC, you have this wonderful manual. And like I mentioned at the beginning, you know, our human needs are really important and key. And you can always go back and reflect on these. And there are various human needs we do have. So oftentimes what we see is that people will be able to cover these needs simply by visiting with you. So what's great is that you're like a one-stop package for them, okay? You can actually approach their needs in many ways, physical, mental, social, spiritual, just by being with them. And this is why we have that name of that program. Looking at the physical needs, we are actually able to show people, like, you know, we can see when you meet with someone, sometimes, you know, they feel like the physical needs are not met. So one of the ways that we do engage in that is, for example, when someone is older, they can take medications and they might require a certain amount of dosing, you know, certain types of medications. My mother, for example, God bless her, she's has some ailments in her later life, and she's in her 60s, but she takes like literally a little like a little purse that has all these tablets and pills in it. Sometimes she just takes little mini shot glasses of bottles. She puts them out in the morning, and she takes like 16 pills for all these different things. And I said to her, I'm like, why do you like how can you eat after you eat so many pills, right? But she takes them all, and it's like this medicine cocktail, and this helps her. So from some people, they actually need these amounts of medications, and we just have to keep in mind too that sometimes when you're especially over 65, 90% of people over that age will take at least one drug per week, which is that's one. She takes more than 10 a day, but more than 40% take at least 5 drugs per week. And now this gets affected by their levels of exercise, their hydration. I always encourage my parents, especially, and myself, obviously, to drink water. It's really important to get your water and your hydration. And what's funny is, in that kind of culture, my background is European, they say, oh, I had a cup of water today, the whole day. So sometimes you may want to be a kind, gentle reminder, hey, let's have some hydration, because hydration can affect us. Just yesterday, I was telling Alex, I am actually in my 9th month of expecting my baby. And, I've started having some labor pains, right? And if you see me, I'm like literally like this, like I'm protruding. So baby's ready. And I started noticing that with any kind of exercise and dehydration, that equals potential labor pains. And I only learned that day. And so I said, you know what, I need to get hydrated. I need to get back into the water and drinking quite a bit. And so sleep has a big impact as well, hydration. As people take more medications though, I wanted to mention this briefly, they can react differently. And as you get older, you might become more sedentary. You might not be moving around so much. So the actual fat stores in their bodies may go up, which means that typically, especially women, they might take more drugs than men. So that makes a dosing issue. So when they're actually hydrated, it changes their chemicals, it changes their body and their physiology. So that's really key. And so we want to make sure that we keep all this in mind, because sometimes people just simply get dehydrated and they need that extra boost, okay? So this is really key here in terms we're talking about mental needs. Our brains require to be stimulated. So I tried to make sure that my kids, I have 3 kids under 4 right now, and the 3 kids under 4, and the 4th's on the way in about a couple weeks. And so what's really great about that is that kids need constant stimulation. So these things don't change as we get older, right? All that changes is simply the way we get stimulated. And sometimes it's being engaging in conversation, making sure someone's interested in what you're talking about. So you definitely want to gear your attention and your interest levels to the person you're speaking with. When you're visiting with someone, you want to make sure that, depression is a factor for sure for a lot of people, but you want to alleviate that. And any symptoms that you see of that, you can actually help draw that out in the sense of bringing light to it and actually not focusing on the negative, but focusing on the positive. So one of the things that we often see is dementia is a big factor. Depression can actually lead to alcohol-related problems. So people actually having more serious abuse issues as they get older in life. And so when we see, for example, 80 to 90% of residents in long-term care facilities have some form of mental disorder, and that depression is present in approximately 50% of residents. So this is huge. So definitely we want to watch for signs of depression. We want to ensure if you see things like decreased appetite or sadness, maybe insomnia, loss of interest in hobbies, you want to re-engage people, okay? I saw this recently when I met with someone, and they said, I'm really just tired. And I said, well, you know what? That's a sign too of a potential person who's depressed, because they can say things like, oh, you know what, I'm just tired, I'm just, they're exhausted with the situation, being at home, or being in the wintertime being isolated, or just COVID, for example. So we really want to draw that out and make sure that they don't feel or that they're stuck on that. One thing we want to make sure to and to avoid is a key point here is any signs of, for example, suicide, because that can be an issue for some people. They're getting suicide ideas too. So definitely something like that happens, just bring that up and address it with them. If you feel ever any signs of someone speaking about suicide, or speaking like, I'm really tired of life, or I'm really tired or exhausted of this or that, that's something where you want to decide to speak with them and consult with a medical practitioner because, you know, oftentimes we see that most frequently people will consult with their medical services team, a primary care physician, someone shortly before any type of act when it comes to suicide. And sometimes in the last few days of hours prior to the suicide, you want to make sure that you're very sensitive to that. So if, God forbid, something like that ever arises, please do contact us. Or if you hear of anything like that or that kind of information or language, definitely don't take it lightly. That's really key and component here that I wanted to understress this because that can affect people. We definitely want to, make sure that it's brought to light and not just simply, pass it off as if it's just like a passing comment. So definitely. Mhm.
Yeah, one of the reasons for this program is also the fact that people who are lonely, often loneliness leads to that feeling of depression because they're alone a lot, and when people become very depressed, it almost becomes a natural, not for everyone, but this suicidal ideation often develops out of that. You're very down, you're feeling this lack of hope or purpose. And so, this is the problem that you might never deal with a question of someone being suicidal, but you might deal with people who are feeling very lonely and depressed. And by talking to them and communicating with them on a semi-regular basis, you're actually allaying that loneliness, which of course then allays those feelings of suicidal ideation. I actually say something a lot of people disagree with, but I think it's right on the money. People ask for an assisted death. They might have a health condition. That's absolutely correct. That's true. But that's not what's actually driving it. For a lot of people, what's driving it is this feeling of suicidal ideation. And so what we've done is in the culture, we've taken the specific circumstances, having a terminal or a chronic condition, and now we've said, suicide is okay in this circumstance. We'll even facilitate it to make it easier. And that's how things are going. I don't want us to be too negative, but I do receive calls all the time from people who are suicidal and things like that. And the reason is because we have this helpline. So I get calls all the time. And in these circumstances, if that ever comes up, most often the best way to handle it is you listen, and then you just simply talk to them about the things in life that they find joy in and hope in. Things that, if they have a grandchild, if they have you're not here to be a counselor. You're not here to be a professional, a mental health professional, but you are here to be a friend. And so I always start talking to them about their family, other things in life, and I try and find those little pieces of hope that they would say, yeah, you're right, that is important. And obviously speaking, someone who needs mental health help, we're not providing that. Anyway, you go on, Kathy. I interrupted. Go on.
Well, thank you so much. That was great. And that's so important too. So there's that helpline, of course. So you can always actually reach out to us if that situation ever arises. So with this, we want to just note here social needs. In terms of social needs, we often see that people they'll lack social relationships, and that's a strong risk factor for mortality, just like smoking would or obesity would have an impact on you, or lack of physical activity. So when you have like a full pinwheel of social, mental needs, spiritual, physical needs, and all of them are perfect, then you have a complete wheel, and that wheel turns perfectly and it operates and it works. But if we see, for example, that one of those little pegs on that wheel are smaller, we definitely will have an issue with that person's functioning and just overall care and well-being. So definitely social needs are important. You want to engage that person. Lack of social relationship is a strong risk factor for early death. And this is a strong point we want to bring and draw here. And we want to make sure that people realize that if they are not met socially, then people feel like they don't have this really need to continue. And that's really important. We need to underscore this because 1 in 5 Canadians age 65 or older indicated that they felt lonely in some of the time or often. And as they get older, even over 85 or 80, that statistic just continues to go up. So this is a really key, a very important factor. And we want to make sure that you draw this important fact out too, that people feel as they get older too, that they may feel they have a fear of burdening others. This is a common trend. And we want to address this, especially when it does come up, because people will say, oh, you know, they may talk about the meaning of life after death, for example, like Alex said, and those are starting to get into that weary area of depression. Those are fears and their own worries that are coming up. And what you want to do is being a friend. It's just exactly what Alex said. You want to be a friend and you want to impact them. You can call them daily. I realized this just recently when my mom, last couple weeks ago, there was about a week where we like went from Tuesday to Friday. It's like 4 days where I didn't call my mom. And she called me on Friday, pretty upset and said, why haven't you called me? I said, Mom, I called you, I left a voicemail. She's like, well, it's been a week. And I said, see, and that's the funny thing. I noticed it was the last time I spoke to her, but yet, a week can go by and they notice it right away because they don't have any other contact perhaps with other people. So you really want to, sometimes you may want to engage someone daily even, especially if you know they're prone to loneliness or depression, and just emphasize that they're never a burden. They're not, that those feelings are understandable, but they're not actually true necessarily, that they feel that they are, or they actually are a burden for anyone else. They might say, like I said earlier, they say they're tired. You definitely want to expose that a little further, see what that means. Are they just exhausted of the situation, or are they actually physically tired? There's ways that we can actually alleviate some of that too for them and help them through that. Communication is key, folks. So we definitely want to underscore that. If you want to get on the phone with someone, if you can't see them, let's say you're feeling ill, or maybe they're not feeling so great, they cancel an actual in-person appointment, you could actually have a phone call conversation with them. You can do a Skype, a Zoom, a FaceTime, a WhatsApp call. So those are all options that you can have and engage in communication, which help them through that process and actually help them in this overall project and just simply engaging with them. Thanks, Alex. Spiritually speaking, we can definitely help with that as well, in that when you're visiting with someone, their spiritual needs, that is something really crucial, because as I get older, even myself, our relationship with God is very important. And, later in life, I find it becomes even more important as you start nearing death even. My kids are 4, almost 3. And this month, one of them is 3. And then I have another approaching 2-year-old. And it's funny because we pray together, all 3 of us with my husband every day. And one of them, the middle child, Noah, he will come into my room after bedtime, technically, and he will say, Mommy, we forgot to say this prayer. And he remembers this one prayer that we say out of all bunch of them. And he'll say, Mommy, we need to say that prayer. And we say it together. So this is really key. If a young child can remember to say a prayer, and others may not necessarily, who are older may not feel that's the case, then we definitely need to address those needs, because those are spiritual needs that need to be met. Some people may call themselves religious. They may call themselves spiritual. Just realize that there are differences in the connotation, especially with CWL. Oftentimes, some people might be reserved around the church. They might feel like they're more conservative, so they actually don't want to use words like spirituality. They prefer saying religious. So this is another thing that we may notice when you're visiting with people, if it's for the first time. And of course, I'm sure, more than aware of this. Existential needs are really key here. Oftentimes people just need someone to pray with. So if we can, we would definitely love to share with them prayers that you have on your heart. You can share ones that you have in a book, for example, if you know that they like a particular prayer book or a novena or something that's engaging them in their actual, a person that they want to pray with. Perhaps even some other members of their family, if they're around, you can actually try to involve that in as well. That's really great. So definitely we want to ensure that that person's needs are met. Praying for them. Sometimes you'll be asked before you leave, oh, do you mind praying for me? Please definitely mention their family as well, because they love to hear about their family. And that's also helping to guide their needs there as well. Thank you.
I was going to make a comment, of course, since many of the people part of this presentation are connected to the Catholic Women's League, not everyone is. Obviously, people who you're going to be visiting, since this particular training is oriented heavily towards the Catholic Women's League, they're going to be people of the Catholic faith. But you might be visiting someone who's not comfortable. So remember, when you're dealing with things like spiritual needs, everyone has spiritual needs. There's no question about that. You have to sort of follow the direction that they're taking you. Some people will get uncomfortable. I hate to say it, but we know that there's some people who've experienced some types of abuse in their life, and it's a difficult question for them. That doesn't mean they don't have spiritual needs, but we have to be careful how we walk through that. Whereas others are going to be very inviting. They're going to say, can we pray together? And obviously speaking, if you're comfortable with that, that would be a very important thing to do with them.
Yep, exactly. Thank you so much. It's a great point. So, and one thing that people will often find is existentially too, but bringing back on the one thing is that reflecting on one's previous life experiences, as you are nearing later and later life, you may actually not be as engaged in your community, your family life, all of that. So going back and actually reminding them stories, the My Story program actually allows you to ask really great significant questions like, who did you grow up with? Who were your childhood friends? What did you do after school and on weekends? That actually goes back and allows them to compare of where they used to be and actually re-engages them mentally, spiritually, but also existentially. Really great way to get them back kind of thinking and loving life. So thank you for that. The next point we want to just mention here is when you're speaking and actually meeting with people and visiting. This is my favorite personal part here. So when you're visiting, it's so great to actually engage in person with people, right? Unfortunately, because of COVID, we've had a lot of issues in this department. So we're really happy to see this great group today with you all on it and training with us today, because, you know, there's ways that you can reintroduce visiting in people that you want to connect with in their life and in the communities that you're part of, especially CWL groups. So one of the things that we noticed is, you know, there's different protocols. So for example, in your area, please do follow the guidelines of what are necessary in order to re-engage people in visiting in person. Check with, you know, their service, whichever they are, if they're in a nursing home, long-term care facility, or if they're in a retirement home, what type of issues might come up when it comes to visits and when you can visit. So that's something really key you want to speak to them about. Definitely if you have, you know, personal protective equipment, use that, hand sanitizer, have that on you, face masks. Whatever is necessary that you can engage with them in person is really key. Definitely make sure you check how you're feeling the day of a visit. Sometimes, you know, I have a group of women that I meet with once a week with our kids. And so if someone is sick in that group, our common basic courtesy is we don't try to meet, okay? So if your kids are sick, you try not to engage and have that potential you know, crossing over that germs and things like that. So that's our kind of motto. And especially this is important when you're meeting with people. So if you're not feeling well that day, definitely reach out to them, reschedule if you need to, and see if they're free what day and book that appointment. So right away, you have an actual date that you're going to meet with them and it's not left in limbo, because that can draw on longer and longer and longer and we just forget. So stay at least, you know, a little distance away from people when you're visiting them, just to make sure that they feel safe, but also that you feel that, you know, you're comfortable as well. And if, you know, you are helping them, you may be touching them perhaps, or you may shake their hand, make sure you wash your hands right away when you're leaving and when you arrive there, because, you know, just don't want to be potentially part of that scenario of them getting something in an infection. So if, for example, someone, when you're visiting with them, they have a vaccine, you would actually want to make sure that they are aware of, you know, if you need to have a vaccine, for example, to visit them, you would have to, for example, have that dose completed by a certain time. So just be aware of those deadlines, those guidelines as well. So that's just something you want to make sure that you're wary of and you're understanding of. Okay. Thank you. And so before you leave, you want to ensure that you know, you can come up with creative ways for your visit. So when you're engaging with someone, definitely, you know, bring a book. If you have a copy of our My Story book, please do bring it with you. If you have a hard copy printed out, bring a clipboard maybe, you know, have something available so that you can actually write on and actually have a reference point. So you have a schedule or an idea of what kind of questions you want to ask them, and you can engage them in conversation. You be prepared, bring a pen, bring a pad of paper, whatever you decide you want to use. And then, yes, exactly. And definitely, oh, we can't hear you, sorry.
I was just going to say that the My Story booklet is actually which we're going to get to a little bit later in the presentation, is actually a great way to create a purpose and an ability to communicate with someone during your visit. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So definitely do reach out to us. If you need additional hard copies, we can ship these to you. Okay. So that's really wonderful. When you arrive, sometimes people will say if you're in a certain area, you may need a criminal background check, things like that, a vulnerable sector check. That's part of your CWL group. So just engage in them with your president and your council to ensure that you have all those things completed before you arrive. So there's no surprises. Definitely, if you're representing an organization, if you have like a PIN or some type of identification, use that when you are visiting and bring that with you so they can see that you represent CWL or whichever group you're with or church. Definitely, if for example, you have, when you arrive, you want to make sure that you have everything that you need. So wash your hands, make sure your hands are warm. You want to knock and make sure that they can see you or hear you when you actually are stepping into their personal space. If they're sharing a room, perhaps with another person, you want to ensure that both people are aware that you are there and you're present, because they might not be ready. The other person may not have an understanding that you are going to be visiting with their roommate. So you definitely want to be clear, always knock or ring the doorbell. We want to address people with a respectful tone and manner. So if it's your first visit, especially, you want to ensure that you have that respectful, honest kind of regard for them, Mr., Mrs. My thing is, and I want to say this, in our culture, I'm Polish, in my background, we actually say pan, pani, which is Mr. and Mrs. Yes. And this is something where I've been burdened in the past, because when I went to travel to Europe, I forgot that. And I would address someone as you. And I would hear from them that that's not appropriate. You don't say you have to address them with that tone of Mr. and Mrs. So definitely, please incorporate that if you wish, if you're able to. There's a lot of nonverbal cues that people may not realize. That, for example, you're speaking to someone, if you are facing them, you want to make sure that you're facing them in a way that's strategically away from light being directly in their face. So they're not looking at you and looking at, a sunlight coming behind you. So that's something really important. And you want to make sure that, the room might be a little bit more dim, if that makes them more comfortable. If they have a vision issue, you may want to increase the light, for example. And, you just want to be respectful. So often you just want to engage, be very, clear. Remember, if, for example, you walk into a space and there's radio or TV on, ask if you could lower the volume, and then you can always increase it after once you're leaving, and just ask them, would you like me to increase the volume for you when we're done here, like after your visit, right? So emotions, when you're speaking, definitely being sensitive, being kind, being attentive to them, that's really important. When you're speaking with people, definitely we want to ensure that we always keep this in mind, that we don't want to speak to them as if we're speaking about their issue or something that's arised from their condition. Like, for example, if they have autism or a child has autism, we say child with autism, not autistic child. Or if a person has a disability, they're not called a disabled person, but a person with a disability. So, this is really important. We don't want to address the disability. We want to address the person. And that's what we're emphasizing when we're speaking, always having, asking first. When you're about to do something, is really important. So for example, if you're going to move their wheelchair, if you need to get around something, you may want to ask them first, say, do you mind if I just move this chair over here? Wonderful, thank you so much. And you can do that. Never assume that you can do or engage them, or if that's their actual chair, that you can just take that, because it's part of who they are and that's their personal space. So please definitely keep that in mind. That's their ability to walk perhaps, or get around and be mobile. So we definitely want to make sure we respect that and their property. Definitely be cheerful, polite, be a great listener. Half the time when you're communicating is just listening. So I know I'm doing a lot of talking. I can't wait to hear from all of you. So when you are speaking, definitely do keep your reservations of you being the listener, and your goal primarily is to hear from them. Let them open up so they can actually share their story. And then ultimately, if you need to, give them time, because if people are responding and you have a question like, what did this situation make you feel like? Oh, that's an open-ended question. It may take some time for them to actually respond. Let them go through that and actually have them feel and felt heard, because that's really important and key here. We want to make sure that we never, share any kind of confidential information. But as you get into certain conversations, you find that conversation will get more and more sensitive potentially or in detail, might concern other members. Like Alex said earlier, that there maybe have had been cases of abuse perhaps in the past. So just make note of that for yourself, that these are important things that they're sharing with you and you don't want to overlook them, but you also want to make sure they're confidential and keeping that information private. When it comes to nonverbal communication, definitely it's important to listen, like when we said, facial expressions. A lot of people are waiting for that smile and they are happy to see you, so definitely show them that you are happy to see them as well. The voice, if making sure you're clear, audible, they can hear you well. You can actually ask them, can you hear me all right? Yeah, perfect, wonderful. And if you can't hear them, let them know. Touch, making sure your hands are warm is important. If they don't want to be touched, then definitely respect that, please. Eye contact, we're engaging here on a computer, but oftentimes in person, you want to make sure you actually see them. So this is really important. And often we want to make sure that when you do speak to them, you have all these things in mind. So we covered this as well, being attentive, sensitive, and all of that. And ensuring that you have, the open attitude, that when you engage with this book, especially this book, especially for ladies who are in CWL, we have a special set of questions that you can use that are CWL specific, engaging them in their legacy with CWL. So it becomes really personal around their experience with this group. And you can use that and you can print that out, and that's separate. That was sent in the email as well. But definitely you can use either form of book. They can speak about their personal life or they can speak about their CWL experience. So those are great opportunities. And feel free to share with them. There's different tips, like these are on the screen here. For example, using statements. So for example, if someone is speaking and we have someone says something like, it's windy outside. Well, how does that make you feel? Okay, great. And if they're not talkative, you can actually spur their conversation through these great tips. And actually, if someone has a memory issue, you may want to just ask them, so would you, prefer having tea tonight or tea later on? Just yes or no answers are really helpful, because sometimes we do find that cognition might be an issue and you want to make sure that you are aware of that. Definitely asking one question at a time is important. Don't bombard them with questions, because the book is full of questions, so you can always get to them. But if you find they're leaning away from a certain subject matter, you may want to avoid that and join into something else and actually continue the conversation on something else. And then definitely encouraging them to talk about their past. I think it's so key here. I actually tried to engage my dad and have him share his story. So he's really excited because he's a historian, his background, and he studied history, and he loves talking about the past. He also likes comparing what's happening now. So this is really important that we share things that matter to them. And memories right now are really key, because most of his life is spent with his grandkids, with his wife, and with his family in present. But he has so many memories he wants to recapture, and actually having this legacy book, what I call it now, legacy, of a My Story account is really important. Everyone has a story. We want to hear it. So definitely encouraging them doing that is important. And you may have a plan at the start of your visit and you think you're going to get through chapter 1, 2, 3, but you may only get through the intro. So be aware of that it's okay. If you make, slow progress through the book or slow progress through the interview or questions, that's fine. The person's not in a hurry. We're very much hoping that you can engage them so that this becomes a lasting relationship, a lasting friendship that will impact them for a very long time. So that's really important. Conversation tips, these are just some that everyone knows. So I know this is common knowledge, but being patient with them is important. Obviously, we don't want to join in on conversations that are argumentative. My dad, being a historian, politically motivated, religious person, he loves arguing. So for any of you who have met him, he's what they call, they love to engage in something that's controversial, so he likes to stir the pot. Okay, I personally rather avoid those conversations if I'm trying to bring comfort and peace to people. He doesn't care. He doesn't, which I love about him. So don't create opportunities for arguing. People in later life oftentimes don't want that type of unnecessary stress, I think, for the most part. And so we don't want to we don't want to deter from the goal. The goal is to stay positive, optimistic, and hope-filled and engaging. So when you're speaking, definitely don't create false hope either. That's the other side. We don't want to say, oh, there's this great therapy that you can try, or be a medical doctor. We don't want that, right? We don't want to create any sense or false sense of what we can offer more than what we do. Obviously, being honest is important. Being genuine, authentic, people see through that, and then through your communication becomes really important to transfer that and relay that information, how genuine you are and how much you care. And when you're speaking with people, I think it's really key not to be judgmental. You might hear some things that people say, their opinions on matters. They may completely align with yours, or they may be completely opposite. We definitely want to respect those opinions and say, I understand what you mean, because that's really where they're coming from. And then if they happen to have people around them, like their family members, and that family member may engage you to discuss that person, please definitely don't engage that type of a dialogue, because some people want to gossip. They want to find out what your story is going to have in it, or perhaps even just learn more significant details. Everything that is being shared with you, if it hasn't been permitted to be shared yet, that's completely confidential, and certain details, especially of that, may not want to be disclosed. So definitely we want to keep that private. And then definitely not talking in front of someone as if they're not there. That's something we want to underline here. If a care practitioner, medical person comes through and actually asks you a question directly, avoiding the person that is actually in their care, we rather we don't respond to that person. We respond to the person that you're meeting with. So definitely you want to engage both people respectfully, but ensure that the person you're meeting with is your key focus. So that's our main prerogative here, that we are engaging with that person respectfully and dialoguing with them. Okay. Thank you, Alex.
I was going to make a comment here that all of this is based on the fact that what are we actually trying to do? What we're trying to do is someone who's going through a lot of loneliness. There might be somebody we know. They might be someone who used to attend our church. Now they can't attend church because of their health conditions, or because they live now in some institution and they just can't come anymore. They used to be part of a community. Now they're not anymore. We're trying to help them find purpose, meaning hope. We're trying to reach out to these people, but in so doing, we're also recognizing that they are an important part of our community. So we treat them always like they're an adult, respectful. We recognize that when we're visiting them, we're coming in their home. So we recognize that this is their place. So in everything we do, it's always, so as I say, like if you're reading through the booklet, it says, don't infantilize people, meaning you're speaking to someone and let's say they might have some issues, they might have some minor dementia or some issues going on. We don't in any way speak to them as if they are not capable or that they are lesser. We always speak to them in that totally way as I would speak to you, maybe a bit slower at times because it's necessary, but that's all. So we're totally showing respect at all times. What are we doing? We're enhancing, we're ensuring that this person recognizes that their life is important, that they are important to the community. One other thing I think that was jumped over is, and the Catholic Women's League know this already because they, at all their meetings, their conventions, they have this this rule about not wearing perfume. Don't be wearing perfume and things, and that only because someone might have an allergy to it, or they might be very sensitive to it. These are the kind of things. I'll go back and Kathy can take over.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm noticing there's some great questions in the chat, so we'll definitely address those too. I made note of some of the information I was shared there too, so thank you for that. When we're talking to groups of people that you may not know or have their background, we definitely want to encourage them to focus on their life and their story. So don't engage so much on your own side in the sense of my troubles, or my kids do this, or this is, it definitely will come up, but try not to emphasize the troubling parts of your life, and especially the problems, because we don't need to add to their stresses and worries, right? We don't want to make our visit with them be about us and our issues. No one needs a counseling team on this side. So definitely making sure that if you're speaking to them respectfully, you're keeping their best intentions. Don't worry so much about their illnesses or conditions. Sometimes you might realize what they have in terms of a condition, if it's a physical ailment. Sometimes vision might be a factor. And someone actually mentioned this in the chat. My own husband, actually, God bless, he's has a visual impairment. He was born with a genetic condition that impacts his eye cells, and it leads to early onset macular degeneration. So, you know, that's an issue for him where he actually needs to magnify everything on his phone up to 400 times, and sometimes even more than that. So something like you'll notice when sometimes people are reading very closely, they're looking at their phone directly. It's because they have that issue, maybe potentially. So very important point here, visual needs are important. And so sometimes you may want to read the book to them. So don't just assume that they can see what you're talking about. Passing them a piece of paper like this, which is like a normal 14 size font, most people may read, not necessarily everyone can. My mom, in her later years now, needs 2 sets of glasses. She actually puts 2 sets of glasses on her head, and she reads with both on her head. So don't assume that you know what their abilities are, and giving this to them and saying, here, read the first paragraph can be intimidating. So definitely don't try doing that if you're not familiar fully of what their abilities are. Feel free to bring books. If you are able to engage with them going for a walk, for example, it's starting to get nicer. You can, if you know there's a visual ability issue, you can actually say, look at that, like there's this beautiful tree over here. It has some gray hues, some nice warm tones in it, and will bring up something that's beautiful. People like knowing and sharing and hearing from you what you're seeing, especially if you realize that there is that potential opportunity. So if someone is feeling like they don't want to talk, and this can happen, you may actually want to enroll another person in that meeting for next time, or even that date, for example. So you can actually engage them with another person. That way, both people, you are speaking to someone else, and they see that they're more comfortable sharing what they want from their side, and they don't feel so much pressure to have to engage in a conversation. Sometimes you just want to walk with people, you want to be quiet, that's fine too. Excuse me. Tone of voice is important too here. You don't want to be too high. My dad often will say, Kathy, you're really, your tone is really high, you know, and I say, it's because, Dad, I know you have a hearing issue, so I'm not yelling, I'm just speaking loudly. You can hear me, right? But that's a joke. That's why we come across like that. Like he's very funny, and I try to respond likewise. So when you're talking to someone, you want to ensure they can hear you well, but you don't want to overburden them, right? And you don't want to strain them so they're like, oh, I don't want to talk to this person ever again. Not pointing out mistakes, I think, is really crucial, because when someone does something wrong, they'll feel that already themselves. So we don't want to emphasize that feeling of feeling bad or personally responsible for something that's not great. So, and also the last thing here is when we're with someone, they may offer to give you gifts. And this is a great quality. And you can actually say that. That's a beautiful quality, that you are so generous. And, you know, that's a type of love language that people actually love you. They want to share with you something. You know, here I bought this great, beautiful hair, you know, piece, or this nice, you know, pin for you. That's really beautiful and generous, but please offer them not to actually receive gifts, because that's not what your goal here is. Your goal is to engage them and to be with them, not to receive gifts, and not to be honored by necessarily having, you know, physical things given to you. And so that's really important. So in the next point, we just want to mention here is when you are meeting with them, you definitely want to ensure that as you end the visit, or if they become, for example, not feeling well, they're ill, or if they decide, you know, I'm good for the rest of the day, you know, we should end this soon, you see signs of that, you definitely want to ensure that they ended on a good note. Sometimes they might have had a bad day, right? We have bad days too. I always say, you know, if your day starts bad, it'll probably end well, right? So it's just that kind of balance and that mindset of let's be optimistic. And so let's plan for another visit. When can we see you next? You know, really be engaging and, you know, insightful and happy that you are going to see them again, making them feel also that excitement that they're going to see you, because that is part of this whole process of the My Story Being With. You're developing a friendship, not just an interview. And so that's really an important relationship that you're developing with that person. Sometimes they may say that, oh, can you pray with me? Great, jump in, offer a prayer. It's short and sweet, is nice, always better than long and laborious, right? So definitely the same goes with visits. You know, shorter visits are always better than longer visits. And just be reflecting on what you did that day and be like, this was so great. Aren't you happy we got a chance to meet today? Yes, wonderful, me too. Can't wait for our next one. When are you free? and then book it in your calendar, write it down, make sure you have the place, the time, everything correctly, and thank them for that visit, because this was a great opportunity to get to know them more and to share that time together. Well spent. Thank you.
I don't want anybody to feel obligated that you have to be visiting somebody all this time, and then it becomes a burden to you either. So when you talk about planning your next visit, obviously speaking, that might vary depending on the person. Some of you might actually start visiting someone and really enjoy that and want to be visiting several people, and it becomes sort of like an avocation for you. It's something that you're enjoying to do. And somebody else may say, well, this is something I'm enjoying because I'm visiting, you know, Kathy and so, and I've known them for many years, and I know that now in their life they're in a nursing home, or they're shut in a home and they don't have people visiting them, or they don't have children nearby, etc. And so I already know them, so I'm happy to do this. And so you know, and it's going to vary, but plan your next visit obviously means it's your commitment, and you get to decide together. I'm just saying that because I don't want people saying I can't do this because, you know, it's going to take too much of my time. Remember, whether you visit somebody once a month, once a week, it's all of a benefit. So it doesn't have to be something you feel this obligation. I must do this every week and now I can't do it anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yes, and so here, actually, this is a great slide. Thank you for this. After the visit, you want to make sure that you have a journal, and the journal is for yourself, by the way. It's not for anyone else. This is just a moment for you. After you're completing the visit, you leave the premises, or you leave the area with the person who you had visited with. You want to make a note of what you did. So you did this, you spoke about this, you completed whatever you decide you want to do, what task that was done, if there was anything. But more importantly, if there was any kind of crucial information that was shared with you, for example, things or details about their life, their story, their family, maybe a situation of abuse potentially, or something that came up for them that irritated them, you want to note that in your own book and record, just because that's for your own information. These are confidential notes. They're considered legal documents in some respects for some people, if they're noting specifics of people, dates, times, and or even medications or ailments. So you don't want to share or disclose this to anyone. This is simply for yourself, but it is a confidential notation for yourself, so that next time when you do visit, like we said, we don't want you to feel like you're being burdened by this, but definitely we want to encourage you that when you do visit again and re-engage this person, you have a review of those notes before that next visit. You can actually appreciate, okay, this is what I learned. This is where I know I should kind of maybe steer away in conversation or dialogue, and not maybe engage on this topic or this issue if you know that's causing them some discomfort, or, you know, just some feelings of being upset. So places to avoid. And that's really good. You can also evaluate yourself and feel how you did. How are some ways that we can actually benefit them more, that person we're visiting with, and doing different things that will help draw out more conversation? What did they respond to that was really happy and key in that whole conversation that you would want to re-engage them next time? And then think of opportunities where you can actually bring maybe a book, maybe a story, a poem, a piece of artwork, something to do, an activity maybe. If it's an art or craft you think that they might find really helpful or engaging, great, let's do that. That'll stimulate their brain as well. So that's really helpful too. And then if you have any concerns, definitely reach out to us. If you want ideas, or if you want solutions to, if you have an issue, for example, like a technical issue. I'm not a tech savvy person, but I definitely engage in all technologies when it comes to communicating. And, you know, sometimes you need to go through 5 different ways of responding to someone on a tech device to actually get a response through. So, you know, if you find you have an issue with downloading an app, or coming across some type of paperwork that you need to submit, maybe if you wanted to engage a community, feel free to reach out to me. I'm really handy with all types of technology, and also can help the person you're speaking with to engage with them maybe on that device, to show them how to do that. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. If you think there's ever cases of abuse, please definitely reach out to us. There's this helpline number here, 1-855. That's the helpline number. So that's a confidential free service that offers you solutions and helps you in guiding you with these kind of situations or scenarios. If there's a moment of crisis, if someone is talking about suicide, if there's any kind of neglect or abuse that's happening, please definitely engage us. and we will respond to you immediately. So that's really important. And then the final thing, if you happen to want copies of anything, like about, visitations, please contact our office, and you can leave an email, message, whichever, and we'll respond to you as well and get that to you. So thank you, folks. Thank you so much.
So the next issue that we're going to is the whole My Story Matters. So we have the a booklet that's been developed around that, and I think that it really comes together because the idea of the My Story comes from research that has been done in several universities, and you see this has been precipitated in quite a few nursing homes. So the idea of My Story is that when someone is feeling alone and lonely, we often get caught into our own sort of weariness, our own sort of life, and we start questioning our whole purpose, right? This is sort of a normal human reality. But when you start talking to somebody about themselves and you ask them about themselves, you ask them to tell their story, what happens is it creates this new feeling of I did important things in my life. I've done wonderful things in my life, and my life matters. So so what the research has shown is that when you're talking to somebody about themselves, remember you're interviewing them, you're speaking to them. It's about them. It's not about us. Remember, it's about them. What you're doing is you're actually providing them purpose, meaning, and hope in their life, because they're talking about the things they've done, right? It's making them feel better about themselves. And so when we're dealing with these issues, what are we doing? We're allaying depression. We're dealing with their loneliness, and we're helping them with their self-awareness and self-discovery and self-esteem. The funny thing is that we've encouraged groups like Catholic Women's League to then visit their older members, because we recognize that there's quite a few older members. There's quite a few ladies who were involved in things like the Catholic Women's League, or if you're involved with something else, there were people who were involved with the organization in the past who are now not involved, not because they wouldn't want to be, but because at this time in their life, they're really not able to be, because maybe they're living, as I say, in a nursing home, and they're living somewhere else, so they've got health conditions or such things like that. But their story is important, but their story is also important to us, because their story is our story. It's a very important thing to recognize that our history, whether it be in a parish community, or whether it be if someone's doing it as part of a town community, right? They're saying, well, okay, I live in the town of something, and we're going to then meet with some of our older people, and it becomes an oral history. So you're doing two things. You're dealing with these issues of the person's social isolation. You're helping them feel better about themselves, but at the same time, we're creating a story. Now, obviously, all of this is about privacy. All of this is about whether they want things said, and that's fine. Everything is always about the person. It's not about us. Nonetheless, I think that it's very important when we're talking about someone who is feeling depressed, lonely, isolated, that they feel good about themselves. It's good for their memory. They recall events. So you're talking to them about, what happened in their life, how those life events affected their feelings. It leads to key topics. So if you're in a church community, as a prime example, things that might have happened in that parish 30 years ago, something that happened, how did that make you feel? If you're talking about the Catholic Women's League, so one of these ladies might have been the Catholic Women's League president for 2 years or something. Sometimes she got stuck with 4 or 6 years. How did that make her feel? What did they do though during these times? These sharing of memories, it's very important for the person. It helps them cognitively, but it also it gets them into telling their story. And it's very important for that person because it's a form of healing for that person. Now, what do I mean by a form of healing? Let me just give you an example. I got a call the other day, and a family member had died by euthanasia. And this person was calling me because they're very upset about it. This was very upsetting to them. And they had a close relationship with this person. This wasn't just someone who they knew of. And this was a very close family member. And I said to that person, well, you need to talk about this. This is something that is obviously bearing you great pain and suffering, that this person had died in this way. But secondly, it's important for you to write it down, to write down your experience. Now, why was I saying this? Well, writing it down, talking about it, all of these things help someone heal. It helps them come to grips with what happened in their life. It improves their cognitive function. We talked about people who start losing their cognitive function, and often that also can lead to depression. And the reason is that they feel, I can't do what I used to be able to do, and it bothers them. It's a very difficult situation. They have an important place in this world, so we're affirming them as an important person. And so this is very important that we're affirming someone's life. We're affirming how important they are. And I think that's very important. And this is a very practical thing to be doing, because you're talking about a person's life. And we're renewing this, we're reviewing their life, we're writing it down. And the nice thing about it is there is no time frame on this. So let's say, as an example, somebody in your community who you know, who you've known for years, and now they're getting a little bit older, and they've now become sort of, how would you say, somewhat isolated, and you agree, I'm going to go talk to them, and we're going to do a My Story. In doing that My Story, there's no time frame here. You know, you can discuss things and say, well, you know, why don't we come back next week or the week later? And it's important to sort of review it a bit, and then you go on with them. It's very interesting that this allows you to have this relationship building experience where it's now natural for you to come visit. It's not awkward. There's nothing awkward about coming to visit someone if you want to ask them about themselves. It's sometimes awkward and you're just sort of sitting there. I will say that often when you visit someone and you're just doing a visiting, you're going to find that you're doing more listening than anything else. Now, why are you doing that? Or you might just be spending time with them. And that's good. But in this case, you're actually now employing that time. Now you're listening and you're writing down, but you're doing so because you're interested in that person. And you can see how that creates a greater feeling about one's life when someone's interested about that person and you're reviewing it with them. So the My Story has many benefits. So here's the reality. Seniors are at much higher risk of suicide. Now we know that the suicide rate has gone up a lot amongst the younger population. A very interesting study just came out about the last couple of years of COVID, and it was showing, in fact, that there's been a lot more deep depression amongst the younger population. And one of the reasons is that they were forced into isolation in a sense that they weren't in the past. Meaning, you're not going to school, you're doing you're doing everything online. I'm not putting anything down. I'm not judging. I'm just saying it was a reality. It's a human. You're separating people. So we're talking about the health effects of being alone all the time, and this is one of the things that has happened. But men aged 85 to 89 have the highest suicide rate of any group. Now, legalization of euthanasia is a concern to us. So if you consider the high suicide rate and now euthanasia being legal, you can see how these things are now transmitting from one issue to the next. It's easier to have somebody lethally inject you than to end your own life. It's much easier. So we're helping them find purpose to live. That's one of the things we're doing. And you may say, well, yeah, but you know, I'm a member of the Catholic Women's League, and these ladies, they're religious ladies for the most part. They're believers. Now they might believe, you know, all varies. You know, we're all on a different road, aren't we? Nonetheless, they wouldn't consider this. Well, I'm sorry to say, ladies, some people who have faith are considering this. So what are we doing? We're actually helping them find purpose to live. We're actually protecting them from this. Participation in the My Story will significantly lower depression. So that's what these studies have done. There were several studies that were done in universities, etc., where they went out and they did, you know, talking to people and everything, and they were able to notice very clearly that when you start asking people about themselves, that really improves their feeling about themselves, and it really lowers depression. And obviously, I would say it's two reasons. One is someone's actually there with them. They have something to look forward to. They know on Thursday afternoon, you know, they're all Caesars here. On Thursday afternoon, Kathy's going to come over and visit, so they have something to look forward to. But at the same time, they are talking about themselves. It makes them feel better. Ability to care for others is very important. We're guiding the next generation. We have to understand, in the faith sense also, this whole issue of generativity. We're assuring them of their meaning, but we're actually, and we're connecting them to the past, or connecting us to the past, but we're actually affecting the younger generation too. When you visit somebody, so let's say you're visiting somebody's mother, they're going to hear that Kathy is visiting so-and-so's mother, or talking to her on the phone, maybe because of COVID restrictions. We can't visit this person, might be, right? But we could talk to them on the phone. We could talk to them, we can speak to them, and they're going to say to their daughter, whenever a phone call happens, oh yeah, it was really nice. I spoke to Kathy. We had a good discussion. We were talking about, when I was younger and that, and I really had a good conversation. It really made me feel, what you're doing is you're saying to that younger generation, somebody cares about mom. But also, if you're a person from the Catholic Women's League, it's saying, these Catholic Women's League ladies, they actually live what they believe. They're actually living their faith. It actually is a form of then evangelization. We're allaying loneliness. Loneliness is a psychological state, okay? And loneliness leads to suicide. It also has health problems. I could go through a lot more studies. I went through that one study out of Denmark, but there's several studies, and it shows you very clearly. When you read these studies, it shows you, like there's a big study that was done in the US, and they showed that people who were very lonely, that their health effects of loneliness was greater than being obese. Now, I'm not just talking about overweight. A lot of people get overweight. That's not the issue. The health effects of loneliness were worse than the health effects of obesity. And loneliness leads to depression. My story eases that, and we also ease transitions in life. Conversation combats loneliness. My story promotes and reinforces a person's place in society. This is very important. If you're living in a place and you don't live in your home anymore, or maybe you are living in your home, but your family have all now left and your spouse has passed on, sometimes it's hard to see a purpose in your life. And I'm not talking about, oh, well, isn't it terrible they didn't have hope? No, I'm talking about real human reality of what it means to be human. It's hard. And so what we're doing is we're reinforcing that person's place in society. We're telling them that they're important. They're important to us because they are here, but they're also important to us because we're interconnected with them. It's our history. We encourage and we acknowledge them, and reminiscing is very important. Reminiscing is one of those things that a lot of people say, oh, isn't it nice? We talked about the past. And no, actually, it is a very important thing for one's psychological health to reminisce, to talk about the past. Now, I know some people, when they have a little bit of dementia, are really good at talking about the past, but they have a hard time with the present. I'll give you an example. My wife wrote the book about Dr. Barry de Weber, and Dr. de Weber was an incredible man. He did amazing things in his life, and he was certainly an incredible example of a Catholic physician who truly lived his faith. But what's interesting about her, she was interviewing him later in his life. He had no problem talking about the stories of the past. None. No difficulty. His memory was excellent about the past, and he really got into his stories. She taped all his interviews and everything, and she really got into these stories and talked about it, and it really led to a great enjoyment for him. But if you were to ask him what he had for lunch the day before, he really struggled with that. That was a hard thing. Yeah, well, it was hard. Okay. Because that's how his life was at that time. That was just a reality. But reminiscing was very important to him. He became very joyful. And the other interesting thing about that is the wonderful thing I did, because his wife was still alive at the time. His wife had passed away before he passed away. He passed away just like last year. But it really improved their relationship, because suddenly he's reminiscing about the past and he's talking about all these things with my wife, and she's recording it all and writing down things and everything. And it's really then helping them together talk about the importance of their past. It was very important. Helps a person reconcile with the past. So I already talked about writing things down helps, and discussing things help. A lot of people have a hard time dealing with their past, and we're not sociologists or psychologists or anything. We're not trying to do anything like that at all. But reminiscent therapy, in the sense of I'm just talking to you, that's all I'm doing, has a great benefit to someone. Now, sometimes there's a lot of pain in someone's past, and so it's not good to emphasize that, but these things are going to come up whether you like it or not. It's going to happen. My mom in Woodstock got involved with doing a My Story in Woodstock, and she contacted the lady who she had known for many, many, many years, and they were talking about things. And this woman had had several children, and then she ended up. There's a Joan trying to call me if she's on the call here. Anyway, she had experienced abuse in her life and everything. And when that discussion was going on, this was a very personal thing. It was a very private thing. But nonetheless, in the end, my mom said, well, she ended up feeling a lot better about it by just discussing it. See, your story is important. You are an important person. We're emphasizing the nature of the human person and the importance of that person. It's very important. Social relationships. You know, we're human beings. One of the problems with the way the world has gone is we've become far too, how would you say, about ourselves. Okay, the culture has shifted. We're far too about me. And so the difficulty here is that we have lost what it means to be human. And doing a My Story, visiting people, talking to them, asking them about themselves and having them talk about themselves is reconnecting with what it means to be a human person. We're interconnected, right? But social relationships are fundamental. Today, one of the problems with younger people, and the studies are really showing this, especially now that they're looking a lot at this issue of younger people going through a lot greater levels of depression than the past, especially in the last few years. They're finding that younger people spend far too much time just communicating by phone and everything, but those are not the same type of a relationship as actually me talking to you, or me spending time with you, or me having coffee with you. That's a totally different type of relationship. So what's happened is then you'd say, well, my daughter, she's talking to people all the time, or she's texting people all the time, what she's doing, right? So, you know, she's a real social person. But then, of course, then when you how would you say, when we had the shutdown and they couldn't go to school anymore, they lost that actual real social interaction, and it was causing real psychological issues for a lot of people. But what about someone who's in a nursing home? You would say, oh, but they've got people around them all the time, and the nurse comes in the room and brings them some juice or something in the middle of the afternoon and things like that. Is that not a social relationship? It is a type of a social relationship, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. Social engagement is very important. Being with others. Preventing isolation. You know, you can be in a nursing home and you can be isolated, but there's also a lot of people who are not in nursing homes. I'm not a big believer in nursing homes. People who know me know that I don't believe in these things. I think it's necessary in some circumstances, but I really believe in encouraging people to stay in their home. And if we can have home care and we can have community-based supports, that's far better, because what you're doing is you're affirming somebody within the community where they feel they belong, right? You're creating an interconnectedness, a feeling like I have a purpose here. It's a better way to be. Nonetheless, preventing isolation is what we're doing by visiting. We're validating them. We're validating them. That's the other thing about, you know, when Kathy was saying always be positive. We're validating them. This is not about Alex going there and it makes me feel better. It's about us validating a person who we know is having social issues, not because they choose to be, but because this is where they are in their life at this moment. They're a special individual. They have a lifetime of experiences. You know, I'll give you an example. The lady across the street from us passed away a few years ago. When we first moved there, though, it was very interesting. Mrs. McDonald was her name, and she had been a teacher in her younger years, and now she was around 90. And so we have this daughter, and Genevieve, and she would be about, at that time, about 7 or 8. And she was saying, can I go visit Mrs. McDonald across the street? And we'd say, well, make sure you ask her first, you know. And sure enough, she would ask, and Mrs. McDonald was happy to talk to Genevieve. And Genevieve was real, you know, social, upbeat type girl. So it was all good. And, you know, Mrs. McDonald was happy to have her over. And, you know, if I bumped into Mrs. McDonald, she'd say, oh, yeah, she's a joy to have over. But then the problem was Genevieve would be going to visit Mrs. McDonald. But then Thomas, who's our youngest, he's now 19, he would be, let's say he was 4 at the time. Can I go visit Mrs. McDonald? He would say, and we'd go, ooh, I'm not sure about that. So I asked Mrs. McDonald, I think Thomas wants to visit you. And she'd say, oh, that's fine. I could have Mrs. McDonald. We thought, oh, that was great. We could have Thomas. And so then you have Thomas and Genevieve visiting Mrs. McDonald across the street. Remember, she's around 90 or so. And a couple of years have gone by. Well, what are they doing? And Genevieve would say, oh, well, we play hide and seek at her house. And you're thinking, oh, this is interesting. We're playing hide and seek at their house. So you know, you can imagine this elderly lady who's playing hide and seek at her house with my kids. But anyway, you know, you might wonder, why am I getting to this whole thing about relationships, engagement, isolation? When she died, we went to her funeral. We took Genevieve and Thomas with us. You know, it's a small town. We took them with us. And all the family then you're greeting the family as you're going through the line. They're all saying, oh, this is Genevieve and this is Thomas. So my mother talked about you all the time. You know, you were really important to her life. And so I'm saying, well, you know, that's one way of providing that social engagement in that situation. I'm not saying it's a good idea, because maybe a rambunctious 4-year-old might be too much. But in the case of Mrs. McDonald, it was a blessing in her life. But we're doing a similar thing. We're being a blessing in someone's life. Reminiscent therapy. Now, that's not what my kids were doing, but anyway, it helps to deal with the past psychological traumas. We're not doing this. We're not being a psychologist. We're just talking to someone. We're being a friend with someone. But these are natural things that are going to happen. You're helping someone heal in their later time of life. We're creating a sense of peace or relief. We're asking them questions. These issues are going to come up. It's totally private. And remember, if they, let's say they share a story and they were a member of your community, so now you're going to ask them, can we share the story with the community? They might say, well, nothing about that, please, because that's a personal thing. And that's what you would then, of course, totally listen to. There would be nothing about those issues that they don't want in any way shared. Nonetheless, they might want to share other parts of their life in those stories. But nonetheless, the fact of it is it was a healing component in their lives. It's all about someone, as they're approaching a later time in their life, or going through difficulties, experiencing healing, not because they went to a psychiatrist or something, because they simply talked with someone, and it's an important part of their life. These are the basic questions that we deal with. It's actually something that the booklet helps us with, because when you go through the booklet, and as I say, there is a CWL section that was created that could be just added in, or you can create other questions with it. But it's basically just going through the basic questions. And I think we emailed the booklet to you, but you can order the booklets, and it allows you to go through. Now, not every question is something that would be, how would you say, useful in dealing with someone. Like, there's the basic questions, but someone might not want to talk about certain things, or they might not have certain parts of their life that they want to just deal with, or it's just not applicable to them. So that's a variable thing. But these are just the basic questions we're dealing with. But then we also get into issues of relationships. You talk about relationships. You talk about if someone had been married 30 years, 40 years, whatever that might be, they might want to talk about that, and then their childhood, etc. So we have the booklet here. Now, the other thing about the booklet is this is something that, as I say, it's a guide. It helps you. It's not something that's, how would you say, the only thing that can be used. And we're at 11:30 now, and there was a whole bunch of chat questions. And so what I think we should do is have Kathy go to some of them, and I'll go to other ones. And the other thing is, the nice thing about the whole thing about the My Story is it does, as I say, a couple things. It then it leads you as a purpose for visiting. Once you've actually talked with someone for a long time, they become a close friend of yours. After that, they might have completed their My Story, and after that, is someone you've gotten to know. You might want to keep talking to them, visiting with them, calling them. Why? You've shared an experience. You know this person now, so it becomes something that you're doing for each other. But it's a joy to you as much as a joy to them. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, the My Story creates a purpose for visiting, because, as I said earlier, it could be awkward. It could be very awkward to say, "Oh, I want to come visit you," and da-da-da-da. And they'd say, "Well, why do you want to come visit me?" No, I want to talk to you. If you're from the Catholic Women's League, you could say, "Oh, I'm from the Catholic Women's League, and you were involved in the Catholic Women's League in the past. We just want to talk to you about your past experiences and things like that." That's the history that's important to us too. So anyway, Kathy, I'm going to go over to you, and you can look at some of these questions that have been asked. And if anyone has a question, you can simply put your hand up, or you could do it by the chat. Either way is fine with us, and we'd be happy to deal with it. We're going to deal with some questions. We hope to actually take a break maybe a tiny bit earlier. It gives you a chance to have your lunch and everything, because we're going to take a half-hour break, and then we're going to come back and do the second session. And our goal, actually, believe it or not, is not to get done by 2:30, but to get done by 2. That's our goal, not because, but because we value your time. Okay. Very good.
So we have a question, Alex. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you so much. So they're asking if Colleen is asking if we should tell your group if we find someone with suicidal ideation.
Yeah, so the issue is, okay, it depends on who you're representing, because if you can always contact me and talk about it, because I deal with these questions a lot, but I'm not a professional, and I never claim to be a professional. That's the other important thing. When someone's calling me, so let's say I'm getting a call from someone who actually is this sort of experiencing these things, and they call the number. What happens is someone will say, "You should call this number," and then I get the call, because I'm usually answering the phone calls, right, on these things. And I make it very clear, I'm not a professional. I'm just here to listen to you. I'm just here to talk to you. And I'll tell you what I've learned to do, and it's just a learning of a human reality. I'm dealing with someone who's saying, often they have a health condition, Often they're going through a difficult time, whether they're very lonely, etc. They might be very, very depressed. Now think about depression this way. Someone who becomes really, really depressed, they become very blackened in how they view the world. It's just a reality. It's they're being a human being. It's like a horse that has blinders on. You know, race horses that have blinders on to keep them focused. They naturally have had developed this. Why? Because they've gone really deep in. They've become really deep into their situation. And I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a professional in any way, so I'm not dealing with all those other questions. I'm simply asking them, why are they feeling this way? What am I doing? I'm trying to ask them other questions. Well, what about your family? Do you have friends? Are you part of a community? That's all I'm trying to do is feed them into what? Little hopes. But then will say to them, well, are you receiving any treatment for this? Is there someone to call? If they're really actually experiencing suicidal ideation in a deep way, they should see a professional. That's how it is. And how do you get to that? Well, if you know that person well enough, or you know someone who knows it well enough, you have to be very careful how you talk to them, because we don't want in any way make it sound like you're belittling them, you're putting them down, you're making them feel they're not abnormal at all. They are normal. This is a normal human reality, and we have to recognize that. And so then you try and move them that way. Now, if you're part of a church community, then you might have a ministry within your church. There might be your priest, your pastoral minister. These are people who should talk to them. If they're not trained to talk to them about these things, then they would know someone who might have that same faith community perspective to talk with them. What they need is someone who's going to listen and help them through that process. Because remember, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes it's hard to see it. Colleen has her hand up, so why don't I just say to Colleen, can you unmute yourself and you can ask your question?
Hi, Alex. The reason I was asking that question is often the people who are most challenged with loneliness don't have family, don't have anyone who's advocating for them. So I was wondering if it actually is somewhere in the system where you talk to someone about that particular instance, because otherwise I don't know how, like I was my mom's caregiver.
Yes.
And I was able to talk to her doctor, and then her doctor arranged, for a social worker to come and but if I'm not familiar with their doctor, like I don't know how I understand what you're saying about trying to talk them and help them through it, but if you really think that they need professional help, is there a process that's identified within the systems to get that person help? I'm thinking maybe there isn't, but
yeah. Well, here's a situation. You might live in Edmonton, and I live in London, Ontario. So obviously speaking, there'd be two totally different circumstances as to where they could be directed. We've been encouraging with Compassionate Community Care that this be done in a community model. So what happens is, Colleen, you might lead a community training or a community model within your parish, or within, as I say, the CWL, as an example, if that's what you're involved in the Edmonton area, or whatever that might be. We're encouraging it to be a community model. So therefore, there would be someone who you would contact, and they would say, well, let's try and help find this person some help. Now, in the case of this presentation, most of the people, if not just many of them, are connected to the Catholic Women's League. So obviously speaking, that's a parish model, and that's how you're connecting with this person in the first place. You're not connecting to this person because they happen to be someone you knew 3 or 4 years ago who lived down the street from you, and they're now in, let's say, a nursing home, and you're recognizing, well, I know this person. Someone should be visiting them. Maybe there is someone visiting them. I don't know, but there's no reason why I shouldn't be visiting them. But if it's a community model, such as this is such and such Edmonton Parish Group, or whatever, family of parishes, whatever that might be, then obviously you should be looking at that through your priest, your parish community, etc. And there are resources, and you may not know them, but certainly the pastoral minister certainly should know them.
okay.
In the sense of what I'm saying, I'm not talking about in any way that we should be seeing ourselves as psychiatrists, and no, not at all whatsoever. But what I'm saying is, when it's before you, when you're actually sitting there and these are clear issues coming at you, I'm not saying this is going to happen to you, but if it does happen, then this is the tactic I always use, trying to find little hopes in their life, trying to find a place. Like, don't you have family? Who is it that you know? And you remember, your visit actually might be the beginning of the healing, because if you visit, let's say, this person once a week, You talk to any of these people, like the video I showed at the very beginning, the man was saying, well, this woman calls him every Saturday night and he keeps the phone right beside him because he knows she's going to call at 8 p.m. Well, obviously, what's he doing? He's looking forward to that phone call, isn't he? And that's positive. So let's say it's a parish group as an example, and they're a member of St. John's Parish as an example. And so you're working within St. John's Parish to do some visiting. You're given that name by the community and you're calling them up and say, you know, I'm a member of St. John's Parish and I know that you are part of the parish. And so I'm just wondering if you know, we're doing a visiting program, if you'd be willing to participate. So it's all that thing about inviting it. And if the person has no interest in it, it's not that it's not going to be good for them, but you're not going to go visit someone who's got no interest in seeing you, right? And at the same time, it's the same thing with the whole My Story program, saying to them, well, you know, we're working on this sort of a My Story for our parish or a My Story for our Catholic Women's League group, whether that might be. Are you willing to participate in such a thing? They might say, oh, I'd be happy to talk about my past, but I'm not sure about this My Story thing. That's fine. You see, you know what I'm getting to? Everything's being done with permission. I would never say to you, oh, just start visiting the lady down the street and bring the booklet and the pen with you. And no, it's all about saying, you know, you would contact the lady down the street and say, I was just wondering if you'd like to have a visit, because, you know, and she would either say, well, you know, yeah, Thursday afternoon will be fine, and that might work for you or not work for you, and you can just work out a time. Or she might say, you know, I'm pretty busy with A, B, and C, and then you realize, oh, she has a lot of things going on in her life already, which is wonderful. So everything's about volunteer, them agreeing to it. Like, we're not going to do anything without one's permission.
One person who's asked about, excuse me, for someone who has a visual impairment, is there some guidance for working with the visually impaired and the hearing impaired, such as being comfortable asking them questions like, what do you find works best for you to hear me?
So Kathy, you definitely have expertise with people who are visually impaired.
So for the visual impairments, I find definitely it's very good to kind of observe first and see how they relay information in terms of reading and aptitude. When I met my husband, who, like I mentioned earlier in the session, if you're joining us later, has a visual impairment, I noticed right away that when he speaks, he speaks with confidence, but when he has a phone and he has to look at his phone, he actually has to look at it very close, like literally, and zoom in. So he actually have to increase his magnification, where you and I would read something on a normal piece of paper, like this, for example. This is actually size 14 font. He would need support reading this, so he cannot read this. This would have to be at least 3 to 5 times bigger in magnification. So one thing to do is to understand first visual cues. If someone has a visual impairment, assess that and actually say, is there a way I can help you to read this, or may I read this for you? Just assume that, you know, if they're comfortable with you reading something, that they should be fine with that. Most people don't have an issue with this. I find oftentimes the worst way to go about it is to actually place something in front of them and test them. So don't do that. No. Definitely don't do that, because that will draw out insecurities and potentially, you know, just that can be a little bit hurtful for them, because they will have to say to you, no, I can't see that. And so oftentimes I will bring up things that I think they can see. And if they, if I say, for example, oh, can you, you know, if you notice the sun here, it looks very beautiful, you know, we'll engage conversation and I'll be able to measure the amount of visual ability they have. So I won't take it further. Like, we're not going to be doing activities like reading and writing together. If that's some area that's a bit of a a difficulty for them, we will avoid those oftentimes, or we'll come to some kind of adjustment, or I can type, I can write, I will transcribe for them, I will help them with paperwork oftentimes, and that's something on the computer too. I will often offer to fill out a form, for example, for them if they want that extra benefit, and that's really a way that you can support them better. and have them find, they're more comfortable with you as well. So that's really key. And then in terms of hearing, I find it's really important too, is to assess their hearing ability. So with my father, for example, he does have a hearing impairment, and he oftentimes will ask me or my husband to speak louder. So we try to speak directly to him and offer our feedback to him directly, and add his name. So my dad's name is Stan. I say, Stan, Dad, can you hear me all right? If that's an issue, can I, should I speak louder? Is this more comfortable for you? Can you hear everything I'm saying? And if they say yes, that's great. Alex, did you want to add to that?
Yes. So in the case of, first of all, with any type of a disability, you always never assume. They don't just sort of just jump in and say, you always ask them, like treat them as if you would be treating like anybody else, because they are someone who's, because they have a disability, they know they have a disability, so it's nothing new to them, but you communicate with them. So I'll give you an example. I have my lawyer who I do a lot of work with. His name is Hugh Scher. When he was 16, he had a brain tumor, which makes him, the effect of that is on his right side of his body. He is paralyzed on the right side, and therefore he can't see out of his right side. He can't hear out of his right side. He wears a leg brace so he can walk, but you don't really notice. So you notice he sort of limps, but you can't really tell he is actually mainly unable to move that right leg, but he walks because he has a leg brace, right? He's moving his upper leg. He also, you'll notice when he's talking, he always puts a pencil in his right hand, and he's talking because he can move his wrist a bit, but he can't actually, he's partially paralyzed, right? You wouldn't know because he's developed these techniques. But if you talk to him, he'll always say, can you sit on my left side? Why is he saying that? Not because he doesn't like you on the right side, it's because he can't really see and hear you on the right side. So, if I'm walking with him, you'll always say, hey, Alex, make sure you're on the left side. So that's just the thing. So we're communicating, and that's important. You're treating someone as being they're totally an adult, and you're treating them that way. And if they're older, we never infantilize anybody. That's the other thing. We always treat someone with respect, and you ask them. We always ask and ask. We never assume. There is an important point here by Robin Noseworthy about mental health issues. She said, typically each province has a mental health crisis center. Have that number first before you go. Obviously, if there might be issues, you should know that number. Absolutely. Ask if they would feel comfortable talking with someone, such as a family doctor, close friend, a pastor. Once again, I think her advice is excellent because she's doing the same thing. She's talking to this person and responding to this person. I have a son, for instance, who's autistic and has got lots of issues with different things, right? Because when you're autistic, you have issues with certain smells, certain reactions to things and everything. And you should never assume anything with my son, Peter. You just shouldn't. But if you ask him, and you ask him in a normal, polite manner, he might be in a mood, so like he's like any other human person, but other than that, he'll tell you, no, I don't feel comfortable there. Like he doesn't like going to places with large numbers of people. He doesn't like certain smells. And you might think, oh, he's being rude. That you got a rude son. No, he's leaving the room, not because he doesn't like you. It's because he can't handle something at this time. Let's say you're wearing some perfume or something and he can't handle it. He's not sticking around. He's leaving. So that's just the reality. But if you ask him, he'll say, well, I can't handle the smell or something. And he's sort of actually brutally honest about it. So I'm going to make a comment, and based on some of the topics, we're going to talk about the second section, but on top of it, some of the topics that we talked about in the first section, and that is the fact that we're actually trying to be very positive, but we're being very straightforward and honest about some of these things. So when we mention things like elder abuse and things like that, it's not because we're expecting you to bump into elder abuse, but we're saying that if you do bump into elder abuse, we had better talk about it ahead of time. We're not, when we're talking about these issues of concerns around somebody and suicide, it's not that you're going to bump into someone who is suicidal. You might. And we're assuming that it's possible that you might, and it's better that we talk about it ahead of time than ignore it and say, well, this is not going to be the norm. Like the purpose of the visiting is not that we expect all these things to happen. It's just that if it does happen, we have at least discussed it ahead of time to make sure that you're prepared for it. And there's some topics in the second half, like elder abuse, for instance. It's a very important topic, and I want you to know that these are incredibly important issues, especially now in our culture. But I hope that you never have to talk to somebody or be spending time with someone and you're noticing that there's a problem going on here. I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm not going to suggest that it won't happen. And so therefore, it's important that we discuss it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a video first again, like I did last time. And this is a little bit different video. It's of a similar program, something that is going on, and it's again a program out of the UK. I'm not suggesting this is a program that you should be following, etc., but it gives you a lot of insight into the loneliness in communities. Okay, and am I admitting someone here? Good. And so I'm going to do that right now, and that'll and hopefully by then everyone will have rejoined us, and then we can start with the second half right away. So.
Stood out for me there was that such a simple idea actually, and the huge impact that it has.
Absolutely. It really does bring friendship back into the lives of older people who live on their own. In this country there are around 2 million older people who live on their own, who live many of them live very isolated, lonely lives. And just to bring some friendship back into their lives, and that's really what happens with Lorraine, who you saw there, and our other volunteers. And it really is about making a difference to their lives.
Because as human beings, face-to-face contact is so important.
Absolutely, it really is. And I think we know that the whole issue of loneliness and isolation is linked to depression. And once people get into that spiral, it's very, very difficult to get out of it. And that friendship, that face-to-face friendship really does make all the difference.
And also, once you start to withdraw from those social situations, your confidence gets lower, and once your confidence is low, then it's sort of catch-22. You can't get back into it.
Absolutely, and we find that some people who want to come to the tea parties and they sign up to come to the tea parties, actually it takes them quite a while to actually get there because of that whole confidence thing. And what we do is our volunteers go and meet them first and really try to make it as easy a process as possible.
You said a lady came up to you and said, "Thank you, you've brought me back to life."
Yes. Yes, I mean, we hear that all the time. I spoke to a lady last week who said to me, I was on a downward spiral until I joined your tea parties, and you have brought me back up again.
Oh, that's amazing.
And to hear that sort of thing, as you say, Holly, from something that is a very simple idea, really does make that difference.
And the other thing is that there's a lot of guilt, isn't there, like for families, actually, when they think about maybe an elderly relative or somebody maybe in their community that they know and they don't quite know what to do, or how can I help? Or I keep thinking about them, but I don't know what to do.
Yes, and we've done some research which tells us that an awful lot of people are aware of older people in their community, but they don't know what to do, as you say. So what we're trying to do with our new campaign is actually help people to make contact with some of these older people, but it has to be done in a very sensitive way. We try not to talk about loneliness too much because people don't like admitting that they're lonely. But you're absolutely right. All of us have family who, you know, my parents live back in Gloucestershire, and it's really actually making sure that people keep in touch with them, and that there is that contact
even
all the
a phone
time.
call.
Yes, even, and actually making time for a phone call. I think we all live busy lives, and it's very easy sometimes. Oh, I'll just make a quick call. I've only got a couple of minutes. Actually, allow yourself a little bit longer, because the older people then feel valued and still part of your world.
If you're watching today now, and the nature of what it is that we've been talking about, and if you're watching this and you are an older person thinking, I'd like to get involved, but you have no clue how to access this on the website, where do you go?
Well, I think you look at possibly accessing via phone calls, phoning up Contact the Elderly and actually getting some information. or looking at what other services are available in their local community. There's an awful lot of things different. The problem is there isn't a blanket befriending service across the United Kingdom, so it's actually looking what is in people's local
Well,
community.
we'll put the details on our website, and if you know someone around who might benefit from it, perhaps you could print it out for them and slip it under the door or something along those lines. All right.
Great video.
So what they were doing in this situation is they had started a tea party, and they were inviting people in their community to attend the tea party. So they weren't, as he said, talking about loneliness per se. They were focusing on the tea party. And then from the point of view of the tea party, obviously they were dealing with people's social isolation. I'm not suggesting you start organizing tea parties, but I am suggesting that that was one effective way of doing what they were doing.
When we're talking about visiting, and if people want to share their My Story accounts following their interviews, in your books, there is a workbook here, and I did mention it in our chat. There's a lot of discussion there, a lot of private messages for us to send copies of this, and combined the training manual, which is really great. We can send those copies to you, hard copies like this that are printed. So definitely do message us and in the chat box, or you can call. I left the number in the chat as well, and I'll do that again later, or you can email us too. So just leave your contact information, phone number, email, the address, and how many copies you would like, and we can send those out to you, okay? So thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Kathy, do you want to do the review, or should we just move on?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So we did cover this in the first session. For those of you who are with us, we shared a little bit about what our human needs are: physical, mental, social, spiritual needs. And a lot of these needs are met when we do visit with each other and with the people that you're interviewing. So this is really important. You are part of the solution. And so that's why we're urging you to, jump right in, start visiting, calling up members. During this My Story period of gathering stories in the last year, especially over COVID, we've had a number of people die actually over COVID. And some CWL members have said that since they started this process, some of the people that they interviewed actually passed away. So this has become the actual interview book has become a legacy piece for those members and for their families. And what's really great is if you happen to be in a CWL group, we have a special questionnaire that you can use. We've attached it to the email that you got and was sent to you, but we also will have it posted on our website, and we'll encourage you to use that tool. It's a couple, 2 pages that you can share with people, especially reflecting on their CWL experience. So I'm gonna actually just bring this up. This is a great example. A lady sent us her account, and in attachment to her account, there's a page in the book that you'll see. You can fill in their information, their contact info, and they can attach a photo. So there's a beautiful photo of a woman who was turning, I believe, 90. So she has that photo there, and she shared that with us. And people are sometimes intimidated about this. How long do the stories have to be and all of that? So I just want to let that kind of, if you have any kind of questions or anxiety around that, let that go, because sometimes, even just a one story account ends up being something like this, which is 2 pages, and it's, single-sided printed. And if you have any issues with getting the stories to us, let us know. We can help facilitate that. And it doesn't have to be a lengthy story. It can simply just be something that's shared with that person, and they feel like that's enough. That's all I want to share. But you can continue the process of the My Story account book with them separately in addition to that, okay? So that's always an option as well. And of course, make sure that you do have on the second page of the workbook, there's a page where it urges you to get their permission form. So that's already in the book, and it's in the PDF that we sent you. Make sure that is completed so that the person who you're interviewing gives you permission, grants you permission to have and capture their story and share it with us. So we can then share it with others. And just so while we're here, excuse me, we are collecting stories, especially for the London Diocese, London area. So definitely if you are in that area, there's a 100th anniversary edition that we are formulating with all of these stories. So if you decide, the member you're interviewing, the people you're speaking to are part of the CWL and they're in that area, please definitely reach out to them sooner rather than later so that you can encourage them to submit their stories so they can be included in that legacy piece and be part of that great moment where they're in that 100th anniversary edition. Okay.
Right, the Catholic Women's League of the Diocese of London are doing the My Story for their 100th anniversary booklet, so it becomes a bit of a history for them, and hopefully that it becomes. Hopefully, we get enough stories that it's actually quite impressive for everyone to look at in the future. And this is what can be done in other communities also. This is, as I say, it's a great way to then affirm somebody, and at the same time, when they give you permission, that allows us to share their stories, and it creates like a history of the past, whether it be Edmonton, Vancouver, London region, etc. It doesn't matter whether it be an individual parish community. It doesn't make a difference. It's an effective program, and it's good for all of us to do. So Kathy, are you? Yeah.
Everybody. Thank you so much for that. So for when we're talking about communicating with people with disabilities, if you're looking at your work training book, definitely the ability to communicate effectively and to be taken seriously is important to all of us. So if someone happens to be, engaged with speaking with you or having a communication issue, definitely we want to not assume anything when it comes to communication. If, like I said earlier, if there's a visual disability, you don't want to assume that they're, able to do something or not necessarily be able to do something. Hearing wise, you can kind of understand too where their comfort level is depending on how they're receiving you. So just watch for visual cues, watch for their body language, watch for their comfort level. If they're starting to shy away from you physically, removing themselves, maybe you're too loud. So that's another idea just to keep in mind. If they are bringing themselves closer to you and finding themselves leaning in more, maybe they can't hear you. So just try to ask them, speaking directly to them. With a person with a disability, you want to speak to them directly. You don't want to communicate necessarily to their aide or a person who's speaking like a sign language interpreter. And what you want to do is instead, always use words that are affirming, life affirming, respectful, integrity felt, and things like, for example, disabilities, avoid negative language, sufferer, the victim, things like that. There's so many words that you want to avoid. I don't even want to get into it. But I know in Polish language, when there's a parking spot for a person with a disability, the word for it is called invalid. So that's not a good word. That is a horrible word. But the exact translation becomes, that's what they say. So we want to avoid things that are anyway discriminating and also especially hindering people, bring a negative connotation. So that's just something to keep in mind. Language sensitivity. And also when you're speaking with someone, be sensitive about physical contact, because that's one way people will communicate is physical. So they may want to, move towards you, hold your hand. If you're comfortable with that, wonderful, great, engage. But if you're not, you can say, be more comfortable for yourself and just kind of disengage that type of communication. Definitely not making decisions for others. So if you decide to move something like their chair perhaps, and they have a walker or a chair that's a wheelchair, that's part of who they are. And that's something that they take very personally. So we don't want to hinder their space, their personal autonomy. Part of that chair is that allows them to be mobile. So it's not something that disables them, it actually enables them. So seeing it as a positive rather than a negative and approaching in that manner is really crucial here. We don't want to make a decision. You can always be respectful, obviously, and ask them, can I please move this, your chair out, move further away. Speaking directly to them is key. And then, of course, the disempowering words, we want to avoid those. And I think what people will often say is that, they love being around people who are positive, right? And so if we could encourage them and enlighten them with things that are positive, bringing some kind of text or, words that they may not know about or things that bring life to them, that's really key here. Poetry is wonderful, music is wonderful, and we oftentimes don't realize how motivating certain things are to people until, they mention it. So be sensitive about that. Quieting environments are really great. Sometimes if they're surrounded by people all the time, they may want to be a little bit more removed so they can focus strictly on you and be able to communicate. And the main rule is do unto others as you would want to be, have them do unto you. So that's really important here. One thing I will mention here too is that when you're speaking with people who may be on the spectrum in terms of having autism, you want to avoid things like, for example, colloquialisms. So, for example, you want to use short, simple sentences. You want to end with closed actual questions. So would you like a cup of tea or would you like a cookie? Have them decide which of the two they want, not necessarily kind of belaboring anything and making things too open, which will then maybe distract them or confuse them. Being aware also of too much stimulation is something here that's important. For example, sometimes people will find that the elderly members of our community behave in a way that might be resembling of a person with autism. So definitely you want to make sure, like if they have had a stroke, sometimes they might have similar, behaviors with someone who may even be autistic, but that's not, it's not a condition of them per se, but it's a condition of the effect of the disease or the effect of the illness. So just being cautious and aware of that is important. You definitely always want to approach them with respect. They're an adult and they're not a child. So you want to, approach them in that manner too, not being assuming of how you should behave differently. Don't necessarily engage in a different way necessarily, just because you see that they have a disability perhaps. That's really key. When someone has a chronic medical condition, definitely you want to not be hurried. So when you're speaking with them, your tone is just level and often, just very balanced is really key and important here. Ask if you can help them with anything, and using flexible words when you're communicating. For example, we're not going there would be a little bit more maybe stronger connotation than, for example, saying maybe we'll offer do something else perhaps, or we may visit her in the future. So just to make that opportunity another positive experience, whatever you're referring to. The next slide here, when you're speaking to someone who is perhaps a little bit distressed, they have anxiety, just approach them in a calm manner, definitely wanting to make sure that we are aware of how their surroundings are. They might be having a really off day and it might be impacting the way they are responding to you. So definitely just be aware of that. Ask if they need anything. Sometimes it's really nice just to help someone do something small. Like I'll be honest, with my husband, he has a list of things that he may need to do. And because of his visual impairment, he just doesn't approach any of it. He just leaves it. And then, it builds up. So I try to kind of come in each day and say, hey, what's something that we can tackle together today to make this easier for you? So that's something that's really helpful, okay? Accessing support services. We have Google on our fingertips nowadays. We can find out anything, pretty much what we need to quickly and efficiently. And sometimes that's as simple a task that the person you're visiting with actually wants you to have and complete for them. And, maybe they just couldn't get around to calling that Service Canada or that federal agency or something. Why not offer that opportunity and give them a big piece of paper, write down that number, or actually call them with them so you can help and be an advocate. And so to mention here, CCC is actually starting an advocacy training program, which is super exciting. And that will be starting up soon in the next coming few months. So we'll keep you informed about that. And then also tell them what you're actually doing. So if you are going to be doing something like communicating with them or on their behalf, ask them first. Don't assume, because they are quite capable. So they may need your help, but they may not. They might be very much, relying on just getting that initial spark activity going, and then you can facilitate that following that. So the next point here, if someone happens to have a hearing difficulty, we want to ensure that if you have trouble understanding them, that you let them know, and in turn, just allow them to respond to you accordingly. If they can't hear you, you can raise a little bit of your tone and your volume, okay? And speaking to them, not necessarily to the person. If you are going through an interpreter, if someone is speaking a different language, then you want to speak directly to the person you're interviewing, not to the person who's interpreting, okay? That's a common, excuse me, issue. We find that someone might want to maintain eye contact with you, and the person you're interviewing actually is avoiding your eyes. So definitely maintain eye contact with the person that you are trying to speak to. If they happen to be deaf, maybe, then definitely engage them and speak through the person that's there to help you, but include them always in that conversation, making sure you're directed to them. And for rephrasing, if you need to, don't sit in front of a light source. If you need to speak up and say something or repeat it, please do so. Making sure, for example, that you're speaking clearly and you're actually speaking efficiently. So we don't need to, share so much, but we can get to the point quickly, right? And when you are speaking, making sure you are directed to them position-wise. Oftentimes I find that I don't know if people would necessarily want to sit beside me. So I tend to lean away from most people when I communicate beside them, and I will avoid them. So that's my comfort level, but that's not everyone. Everyone might want to actually be directed directly to you. My husband is very direct, and he likes being in front of someone, speaking to them. And, just finding that person's comfort level is really key here. And speaking clearly. So that's pretty much it, I think, for this slide here.
Well, the key also, someone with hearing difficulties can often read your lips, and
Yeah.
therefore they have to have visual of your face if they're going to do so. And the idea of sitting in front of a light in that, it makes it very difficult for them to be able to see you effectively as you're communicating with them, because some of these people, like, as I say, they might read your lips. I have a cousin who is deaf, and when I was younger, she used to visit regularly to our home, and she was a avid writer. So if you ever sit down with her, she would be writing, and then this went on for whatever. So maybe that was someone would be like that also, would they want to write it down and then you respond like that? That could be their way, but nonetheless, the idea remains the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Alex. And then if someone happens to have a learning disability, when you are speaking and engaging with them, older people, for example, might have an acquired learning disability. So because of their conditions, that may have happened to them because of their illness or disease. And so that might be something that they're not really comfortable with. So just wanting to ensure that you use short, clear, direct sentences, definitely rephrasing certain statements. If they don't understand or they don't quite look like they understand what you're saying, say it in a different way, in a different term, using other words. Using visual aids, definitely referring to a source like a book, a picture, diagrams, writing something out, bring a piece of paper, a pad, a notebook, so really helpful, and just make notes so that people can see what you're talking about if there's a visual issue or maybe hearing or some other form of disability, learning disability even. Showing things is great, and definitely provide an opportunity to answer questions. So just ask for clarity, what they know or what they see in front of them. Does that make sense to them? Okay. In terms of someone who may have a mental illness, with a mental illness, oftentimes you may not even know that they have a mental illness. So you don't need to necessarily communicate any differently. Always stay calm, and just be level. Allow them to speak more so, showing empathy, understanding, be like, and use affirming sentences and words that you can actually say and say, yes, I understand what you mean. And definitely, if, for example, if they're feeling a certain way, you can say that, oh, I understand how you're feeling. That makes a lot of sense. Affirming those feelings is really key here. And sometimes people will have hallucinations, and that may be part of their mental illness. So, those delusions or hallucinations, visions are actually very real for that person with that disability, but don't pretend that they are real to you necessarily. So you don't want to, engage in that whole world or side of things, but you do want to recognize and acknowledge what the person might be going through. And definitely using kind of short sentences that will allow them to, kind of go over whatever's happening, if they are occurring to them right now, will help them reinforce that this is a meeting that you're having, but you can move on from it. You can actually move on to the next point. And if you need support, go get it. You can always refer to someone, a care practitioner, medical personnel that would be helpful to you. Definitely, please do use that opportunity if you need it. And then tell them what you're doing. So for example, if, for example, they need support, then ask them, is it all right if I call on your, nurse aide or your personal support worker to come help us with this situation, and then just engage them. That's really courtesy, really minded type of approach. So thank you. And the next one is, if someone happens to have a mobility issue, moving around, we often find that, for example, a person might have a respiratory or a heart condition. They might have trouble walking a long distance. My father, another perfect example, I love him. He's put on a lot of weight since COVID started in the last 2 years. And it's been something of a hindrance to him and his abilities. So what you want to do is ensure that when you are meeting with them, if part of your meeting is to actually be physically active, making sure that they can keep up is really key here. And so what we want to do is, you know, a person saying things even like, oh, say a person uses a wheelchair versus rather someone who is confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. That type of terminology you want to avoid at all costs. And you want to be positive in relation to their abilities and also their whatever instrument or whatever tool they use. And that's actually because that's enabling them to do that, to enable them to work and to be mobile is that tool. So you definitely want to respect what they are using. And that's liberating and that's not confining. So that's really great. When you are talking to a person who has a wheelchair, you know, grab your own chair and sit at their level. So you're not standing above them, not looking down, and you're not making them feel uncomfortable. You want to definitely have a bit of a distance, slightly, but so that you're not necessarily causing them to strain themselves to make contact with you. And then be aware of their reach limits. Oftentimes, sometimes people are not able to reach their arms fully or able to move and grasp certain things. So just be handy. And if you want to, feel free to offer them support and relay something to them. If they decide like they want to turn on the music or off the light. Oh, hey, did you want me to turn off this light here? Okay, great, I'll do that. Okay, and then the last thing is don't push or touch a person's personal space necessarily, like a wheelchair, for example. That is their personal space. It's part of who they are and their comfort. So definitely you want to be aware of that and not engage necessarily with something that's so close to them. And then the next one, what we want to touch on here is speech difficulties. So if someone can't hear you or they can't understand you, don't assume that. Just simply proceed and see if you can have them acknowledge what you're saying, ask questions, be patient. If you can get a shorter answer from them, that's better. That way you don't have so much kind of misunderstanding. And then being attentive is really important. So if you, for example, when I speak to anyone in my family, my sister, for example, it can be quite relationally distant to say. So when we speak to one another, you know, I need to have her full attention. Like with the like how Alex mentioned the horses with the visors and the blockers. You want to be in their view, so you know what they're hearing is right. You want them to hear. So for some people, you know, speech can be difficult, but you want to have their full attention, but you also want to give them your full attention. And if after trying you can't still understand a person, ask them to write it down. Maybe sometimes they need to communicate differently, right? With someone who may have a visual difficulty, let's say, for example, they have a walk outside with you and they have a dog, they have you know, a walking visual aid dog, you want to actually walk and place yourself on the opposite side of the dog. So you're not there for the dog visit, you're there to visit with the person. And so you want to walk with the person, not the dog, okay? So just that's just an idea there. Definitely don't touch the dog, and the dog is like working right now. So that's their operation, is their service is actually to help assist the person with the visual needs. And they need to concentrate. So try not to distract the dog. Engaging them too much is good. If you're walking, you may, if they have a visual disability, like for example, I mentioned this with my husband, you know, they may not see that there's like certain things happening or evolving in the horizon. So, and if it's something beautiful, you definitely want to make note of that. And it's actually very nice. If you're walking in close proximity and there's an obstacle, like, you know, a crack in the ground, or something that might interfere with that person going through it, definitely mention it to the person. Noting any obstacles, or watch out for that hole, you know, in the ground there, or watch out for that pit, something that can, you know, affect them. You don't want to make sure, you want to make sure that they're always safe, right? And if you are speaking to them about going places, you want to give them clear understanding and directions. So give specific non-visual information as well, things that you can note and they can understand what is happening around and what's available to them. If you are serving them food, for example, you can offer them actually a suggestion like, oh, you know, on your plate, you have some garnishes. Did you want to keep those, or do you want to put those aside? So something like that, if they happen to be blind and they're fully not able to see, you may want to include that information for them so they have an understanding of what is there. and offer to read information for them. If it's written, you can read it. And that's great. That's a really big help. And then definitely, like Alex was saying, there's members of EPC and even our CCC that have visual impairments. So when you are printing or sending the materials, you definitely want to ensure that it's a larger font and a larger style print. So you want to ensure that it's, a bigger size so they can actually read it as well. And, you want people age, and as you age, vision changes, right? So just being aware of that is really important. And communication, of course, is key here. Thank you.
I was going to say that similar to your husband, the president of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Amy Hasbrook,
Yes.
she's got a similar visual impairment since birth. And similar to your husband, she reads everything. It's just that everything's blown up really, really large. So this is just a reality. So we can't assume that when someone is blind that they're completely blind. They might be. They might have some vision, but everything varies on the person, and that's very important to recognize. And obviously, once again, everything you've said is all based on we're communicating with somebody, and we're taking prompts from that person as to what they think is best for them, the best way for them, how they prefer it, right?
Yes.
So now we're going into advocacy. Now we're developing an advocacy program right now, and it's pretty much developed, and it's very important because what we've noticed is that a lot of people, and I've definitely noticed, is a lot of people, they have health issues and they get older, or they might have disabilities. And it's not that they their health issues are maybe so specific to them, such, etc. But if you're an older person, you have to understand that the world doesn't see you maybe as you see yourself. It's important to have an advocate with you. Now, why is that? Well, let's say you are going to the doctor and you're in your mid-80s, etc., and you've got a lot of different health issues that might be not anything extremely serious, but there's lots of minor issues, things about you that you have which have developed, and that's totally normal. But the doctor's going to look at you differently. So you hear of all these people who are given all these, they're given different analgesics, they're given different pills for things and everything. Well, there's right off the bat, there's the issue of, well, what is the doctor doing? He's saying, I don't know what I can do for you. I really don't know. And he's not thinking of you as some human being who he can treat. He's looking at you as some old person who, well, it's the way it is. But when somebody's with you, now you have an advocate with you. That person is the one in your corner, right? They're the one who's either taking notes to say, well, what are you going to do about my mother's back problems? She said she has a lot of pain in her back. It's possible she actually has something that could be remedied. But the doctor's thinking, she's got pain in her back. She's 85 years old. What I'm saying is they look at you differently when there's somebody who is with you. They see you as part of that community. This is a mother-daughter. This is an elderly woman with her friend. She's an important member of the community because there's somebody there with her. And it's not that the doctor or the nurse is a terrible person. They may not know you personally, right? So therefore, this is the whole thing. But at the same time, what else does the advocate do? Someone might have trouble stating their feelings about their physical pain. So the advocate would talk to them ahead of time. They might not, they're having maybe difficulties communicating now in life. So let's say somebody quite well has some issues now going on, and you speak to them ahead of time. So you could say, well, actually, she says that her pain is in her lower back, somewhere around here. And so then it helps the doctor sort of then find that. But I mean, your role as an advocate is really to help that person get the care that they need. And it's very important. I should say one thing first, not everyone can be an advocate. Advocacy, and I'm going to get into it in a second, you're going to see me repeating this in a second. Advocacy requires somebody who is willing to speak up, who's willing to be forthright about it, but always very polite about it. Because you don't want to be in a situation where somebody is not going to receive care because they thought you were being too rude to them. On top of it, you have to recognize from the beginning you're representing that person. Therefore, it's all about that person. It's their privacy, it's their issues. You're there for what purpose? To help them receive the care that they need. Somebody might be afraid to speak out. Let's say somebody has a hard time, they've maybe had experienced some abuse, or maybe they live in a nursing home and now they're getting more used to being told what to do in their life, and they might have been more assertive in their past, but at this moment in life, they're becoming less assertive. So you're helping that person in speaking out, you're representing them. There might be a lack of understanding. So let's say someone has a bit of dementia going on, they're having a bit of memory issues and everything, or they're having a hard time. You're representing them, you speak with them ahead of time, you go with them and you help them. They may be too ill to speak up. All of this is true. You're representing them and helping them receive the care that they deserve. We believe that everyone deserves to receive that care, not just somebody who is, you know, assertive and capable of taking care of themselves. And we also recognize that in the human person, there is, you know, it's natural that some people will feel uncomfortable with certain conditions, or when someone becomes older, or they might judge them based on experiences which may not be correct. A support person can help that person what? Standing up for their rights, obtaining and maintaining opportunities. Like there's programs, there's things that exist for this person. Gain access to support and services. For instance, home care. It's very difficult to get home care. I received a call a few weeks ago from a woman in London, and she needed home care support for her husband. And her doctor had agreed and everything. So it wasn't an issue of the doctor not agreeing, the doctor had agreed. And when she contacted the government agency that provides that support, they said, well, you know, we're full up right now. We have no further staff. We have no further, call us back in 2 weeks. Sometimes the squeaky wheel would get the grease. You know, sometimes somebody has to say, it's not going to work. This woman's husband really needs care at this point. We have to find a way around this. We have to make this happen somehow. Remember, as Compassionate Community Care, we're training volunteers to be with people, to help people. We're not setting up a service agency that cleans people's houses. Not to say that these services aren't important, but that's not our purpose. That's not what we're having people get involved in doing. We talk to their healthcare providers with them. And remember, you're representing that person when you're doing so, and everything is confidential. Why? It's not your information. It's not about you. It's about that person and only that person. If you have, let's say, a nursing background or some medical background, you would see that that is a type of a legal document or a legal representation. We're saying we're doing so in a training manner as someone who's a friend or a family member or cohort, someone who's being there as support to that person. You need to be a good communicator. As I say, not everyone is capable of being an advocate. We have to be honest about this. Not to say that you can't just be with somebody as they're going to visit their doctor, etc., and just being that moral support. I'm assuming pretty much anybody could do that if they really you know, thought that was going to be important. But to be a good communicator does require some practice. You must ask questions. So the doctor might be saying, I think she has this condition and that, or something's happened, this is developing. Ask questions. Get it to be more clear. Be a good listener. You know, you're asking questions, you're listening, and you're responding. So why are you doing this? Because you're finding out the information that's necessary. So later when the person says, I don't understand what's going on, I'm not sure, let's say they have a bit of dementia going on and they're not quite sure, or they're having some memory issues of whatever degree, you can say, well, the doctor said this, this, and this for this reason, okay? Be always courteous and respectful, but you have to be assertive. And there's a way to do that. I get calls all the time with people and they're concerned about the care that their mother's receiving. And of course, the first thing I'll ask is, well, who's the power of attorney? Who has the legal right to make decisions for your mother, right? This is important because that's how the law would recognize it. And if you have those legal rights, then I always say to them, well, make sure you ask about A, B, and C, or make sure that you really, really stand clear that you want A, B, and C, but always be polite, always be respectful. Why? You don't want the doctor or nurse getting upset at you. You just don't want that, because what does that do? That creates problems for the person who you're representing. Yet you're assertive, so you're trying to get everything clear, okay? And when I say being respectful, I mean really respectful, okay? Because sometimes the doctor or nurse might be uncomfortable with the fact that someone's asking questions, right? And so they're thinking, oh, here's a troublemaker. We're not trying to be a troublemaker, and we're going to make that very clear. Discuss expectations. Well, sometimes there aren't expectations for getting better per se, but there are expectations for greater quality of life. So let's say someone does have some sort of chronic pain. Well, chronic pain can be dealt with in certain ways, but it might never be able to be eliminated. So we understand that. Let's not be of the illusion that we think that, oh, well, A, B, and C will solve the problem. No, A, B, and C might help with the problem, but it might not solve the problem with chronic conditions. We discuss expectations, willingness, and be comfortable with advocacy. You have to be willing and comfortable to do this. And we need written permission because you're representing that person. In the booklet, we do have some general guidelines, but we also have a sample written agreement. And the fact of it is the importance of the agreement is to make it very clear. And then also that's the police check, but we have the written agreement sample also, okay? Why is it important to have a written permission? Because you're representing someone in a legal capacity to do something. And we complete the patient advocate agreement. So that's very important. I'm gonna say something else. There's a lot of people who will be an advocate for a family member. So in Ontario and in Canada, they have these, every province is a little different. So it might be a little different in Edmonton and Vancouver than it is in Ontario. In Ontario, we call them the power of attorney for personal care. That's how we refer to it. And there's different representation agreement names, or how would you say how it's defined in different provinces. British Columbia is the one province is actually quite different than the rest of Canada. Quebec's actually quite different too. Most of the provinces are actually quite similar. Now, you might become the power of attorney for personal care, the one who makes medical decisions for someone, if you agree to doing that. And then what you're doing, of course, is you're making medical decisions on their behalf based on their values. Now, as a person who's on the call right now, you should also have a power of attorney for personal care document that you've signed, that you have set up where you've appointed someone. And the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition has such a document that you can actually use. The important thing about this is when you ask someone to be your power of attorney for personal care, you must remember that they have a lot of power to make medical decisions for you if you become incapable of making decisions for yourself. So it's always important to pick somebody who shares your values. And I'm very serious about this. A lot of people, they will be going through and they, let's say they go to the lawyer to do their will, etc., and they name their eldest son or their eldest daughter to be the executor to the will, etc. And that's all fine and good. And then they have to have a power of attorney for property, and they might then name their oldest son or daughter to be the power of attorney for property. But when it comes to your health care, you must be sure that your oldest son or oldest daughter shares your values. And if they don't, please don't go appoint them. Because remember, these documents only have legal power when you're incapable of making decisions for yourself. Now, that's a little different than what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about advocacy, because obviously with advocacy, you're advocating for someone who's probably considered competent to make decisions for themselves, but at the same time, you are helping them make sure that they receive the services or care that they deserve, okay? Advocate. The advocate talks with the person. So whoever, if you're going to be an advocate for someone, you need to talk to them ahead of time. You need to know what it is that they actually are, experiencing. Because if you're going to be able to say to the physician when someone says, well, I have a really sore back, and this person has told you it's in the lower part of my back, on the right side, I'm really having a lot of pain. You never know. It could be actually, they could have cancer. They could have something like that. We don't know. So you're trying to find out. The doctor might just write it off, but if he actually investigates the lower back and they say, oh, seems to be a lump here, there seems to be something else going on here, it's because you helped them identify that, right? You listen to them ahead of time. We must support them. Okay, we're a support base. This is what we're doing. You act on behalf of a person according to their instructions. Okay, so that's a discussion that happens ahead of time. Now, I've already talked about the healthcare proxy issue. If that person is unable to communicate, you become that healthcare proxy, and advanced directive, living will, etc. And as I said to you, in the case of a living will or advanced directive, I jumped ahead of myself. Then you should always appoint somebody to be that for you, who shares your values. Okay. Before you visit, it's like any visit, you need to have the time of day set. You need to gather information. So let's say the woman who you're going with or the man you're going with is going to go visit the doctor at 2 p.m. as an example. 2 p.m. on Thursday, let's say, be more clear. So you know the time of day. You want to make sure you're there ahead of time. You have to be willing to wait, but you need to have some information. So bring a list of the medications that person is on. Sometimes someone has several medications they're taking, and unless the doctor actually looks at it again, sometimes there's contraindications, right? And so what happened is the person went to the doctor and they had this problem, they received this medication, and then 2 months later they went to the doctor and they had some other issue going on. The doctor wrote another prescription for this medication. I'm not saying that these doctors are terrible people. I'm just saying they're human, and there might be some contraindications. So bring the list of medicines. They might have something going on with them, and they're actually reacting to a medication. They won't know unless you have that list with you. Inform the doctor's office of your role. They must be prepared if there's a delay. So they're clearly knowing this is your role. You're there. Remember, you're not there to represent yourself or to have an issue with this physician or anything. You're there to represent that person. That's exactly what you're doing. I've said that over and over again. What are the person's concerns? This is what needs to be accomplished. What are their concerns? What is the person's medication side effects, expected outcomes? What's happening? Okay. Do they want to discuss any new symptoms or concerns? These are all things we have to do if we're being an advocate. And remember, just because you're being trained in this program does not mean you're willing to become an advocate. I understand that's only certain people will be wanting to be an advocate or willing to be an advocate or have those skills. How do you talk with a doctor about sensitive issues? Remember, these are not your issues. This is the other person's issues. These are very important issues. Your presence may be support enough. And I've already said that sometimes you might just go with someone to be with them, and the doctor will know you're just there because you're a friend. That's it. You drove them there. You're a friend. You're supportive. You're helping them. What's the advantage to that? If that's all you're doing, the doctor is looking at Mary so-and-so differently because they notice that Mary so-and-so is part of a community and here's a friend who's with them, right? Daughters, if you're a daughter of somebody and you want to go with your mother somewhere, it's very important because then you're looked at in a familiar relationship. The physician knows it's not only dealing with this person's mother, the daughter's here too. Okay. Keep a notebook or journal. Now this is very private. The notebook has nothing to do with you. It is actually not owned by you. If you take any notes, it's got nothing to do with you. It's owned actually by the person whose this is about. You are only taking a notebook and a journal to help that person. So let's say they might have some memory issues, they might have some other issues, they might need clarification afterwards. They say again, well, what did the doctor say again about this? You can say, well, the doctor said A, B, and C. This is what we're concerned about here. And you can be a reminder of that, but that's all you're doing with it. You would never share that with anybody, okay? You record particulars, okay? Keep a folder of written responses. This information is absolutely and completely confidential. If someone has a nursing background or they're still an active nurse, they may not be able to be an effective advocate sometimes because there's legal issues. Because they say, oh, I'm a nurse, that's a legal document. And I would say, well, that is an issue. You're right. You have to declare that ahead of time. People have to know this ahead of time. Remember that notebook is not yours. You're the one putting information in it, but it's about another person and it's got nothing to do with you, okay? It's just to help that other person. That's the only reason for it. You take notes, you respect that person's privacy, you ask questions, you can't be intimidated. This is the difficult thing. Sometimes physicians, just because of their work, have a sort of air about them, how they speak. And it's just normal. They've been put in a place where they have to make decisions about people's life and death and about their health conditions, etc. And they develop that as they go as a way of being an effective physician. But you can't look at them as like another god. They're not. They are a human being. You have to be respectful, but you can't be intimidated if you're saying, well, what about this? You have to be willing to do that as an advocate, respectfully, but you have to be able to do that. So you suggest they provide some answers. If they have answers, that is. Inquire about services. Someone will call me and I'll say, it's going to be difficult, but you really do need home care. You need some home care services. This is available to you and you should be able to receive it. And if you can't receive it, sometimes it means that the person who they're caring for, let's say it's a husband and it's a wife who's wondering how they're going to get this home care service to help care for the husband. Sometimes it becomes a real problem and the person isn't capable of caring for their husband anymore because the needs are so great. They need some home care help. Well, they need to get those services. And sometimes, as I say, the squeaky wheel will get the grease. Ask for information sheets. Well, if the doctor's talking about a health condition, usually today especially they have information sheets. And if they don't have it, it's just a click of the computer, printing them printing up those information sheets. They have information sheets today more than ever before, especially since today people tend to be more interested in finding out issues about their medical cases and their medical situations, right? Make a follow-up appointment. If it's necessary, you make the follow-up appointment. If there's any prescriptions that need to be filled, you help them by filling prescriptions. Once again, you're doing it on behalf of someone. You might go to the pharmacist with that person, so you're helping them get it done. So you're not just the ride, you're actually helping them, you're advocating. You discuss the appointment with the person. Why is this important? Because sometimes they might have missed something. It might have been actually emotionally difficult for them to handle. They were told they have some health condition and it's progressed and it's upsetting to them. That would be normal. So you might want to discuss it with them afterwards. They might want to discuss it. And as an advocate, you are an individual helping to make that world a better place for those in need. That's what you're doing. Like a lot of these things, we sometimes feel that, oh, well, I feel better about this. Well, that's good that you feel better about it, but it wasn't about you. It was about the other person. I try to talk about it in that way on purpose because we're trying to build a culture of care, and it's good that we care for each other and it's reciprocal. So that's all good and wonderful. But it's important in this world today that we understand the need of the other, okay? Because that's being lost in our culture today. And yes, certainly I might find a great gain emotionally by doing something wonderful for another person. Nonetheless, it's about the other. It's not about me. Advocate's code of conduct. I will practice with compassion and respect for the person with whom I work. My primary commitments are to promote the health, safety, and rights of the person. I will be transparent in my work with the person. I will maintain privacy on behalf of the person and keep confidential all activities and records unless speaking with my supervisor for advice. Now remember, when you're speaking for someone, let's say it's you're representing the parish at this time and this is somebody in the parish and there's a real concerning issue. Remember, there's privacy in that too. Nonetheless, there might be need at some point to speak to somebody else. And I'm also referring now, there could be some abuse issues going on. There could be some neglect issues going on, etc. I will guide and assist the person in medical decision making, but no time will I make decisions about health or medical care or medical services on their behalf, right? You're making decisions. You're not making decisions. You're helping them fulfill their needs. I respect the person's values and belief system as the foundation for their decision making. So we clearly understand the idea of being an advocate. The idea of being an advocate is to care for the other. I say this more than ever before. We have to understand how the culture has shifted. We have a lot of elderly people in the culture today. We also have a change in our cultural understanding over the last 30, 40 years. So you don't have the same family unit. It wasn't that long ago, even though it's now quite a few years. Historically, it's not that long ago that we used to always be sort of within a family unit. So when you were talking about, grandma needing care, often grandma was living with a family member if she needed care. That's how it was in the past. It's not that way today in most cases. So you have this change of that familiar unit, and it's led to what the reality of it is it's led to a lot of abuse. It's led to some neglect, and we need people to advocate for others. It's very important, and even sometimes just being there is enough, because then the person is seen differently. I want to emphasize over and over again, I'm not saying doctors or nurses or anything are bad people. Some of them might be. Some of them might be willing to kill you through euthanasia, but they're human like anybody else is what I'm saying. And therefore, you recognize that in their human nature, they might see you differently than you see yourself, or that you actually are. Okay? And it's not because they're terrible. It's their human reality. Okay? People with disabilities experience that every day. If you have a son or a daughter or a friend with a disability, it's very important that they have someone going with them who helps them and is with them, not because these people can't take care of themselves and don't have it's because the perception of that person changes when somebody's with them. Elder abuse and other problems. And let me say right off the bat, I'm not suggesting that when you go visit people, you're going to bump into all these people who've been abused. But what we are saying is you might be talking to someone who has clear signs of abuse, right? And it's important to identify that. Abuse, sadly, is a reality. It's not something we talked about in the past. We talked about child abuse for a long time in the past, and now the awareness of elder abuse has really improved, and that's important. A lot of people have elder abuse through family. They experience family abuse, a family member that's taking advantage of them. Often this could be, but what are the signs of physical abuse? Well, there's sores or injuries. These were things that would be, let's say, you might see someone and they actually have some sort of sore or injury, and you'd be thinking, oh, well, that's too bad, you know. And they say they may have fallen or something happened, and it could very well be true. But let's say you visit them 2 weeks later and they have a similar sore or injury. Your then suspicion the first time starts becoming pretty realistic the second time, and you can't ignore it. These people need support. Now, if you're representing, as I say, a CWL community, now you're talking about the parish community. It is a very difficult situation, but you can't ignore it. We have to talk about it, and we have to try and find help for these people. Vague or implausible reasons for the injury. Sadly, if a family member is taking advantage of somebody or hurting somebody or abusing them, whether that be physical or whether that's financial, etc., they don't want to talk about it. Okay, they don't want to talk about it. Why? They might feel it's their fault, so they're going to come up with some excuse. Not seeking care for an injury is a high sign of abuse. Like if you get hurt, you will often seek care for that injury. But if you are being abused, you might not want to talk about it because you're thinking, well, if I do this, my son might get in trouble. I can't do that, right? It's messy. It's you're messy. You're unclean in appearance. You know, so now you're not taking care of yourself. The lack of caring for oneself is often a sign that there's abuse occurring. It could be a sign of some dementia too going on and other issues. It could be a sign of depression. There's several signs that it could be, but this is certainly one that it could be. Malnutrition and weight loss. That's a serious problem. You know, a lot of people who might be experiencing financial abuse, now they're in a situation where they don't have the money anymore. They're having a problem. They're having a serious problem. Let's say they have a family member who's picking up food for them, but every time you give them $100 to pick up food for you, they bring $30 for the food. They pocket the 70 or whatever it might be. There's serious issues going on. Dehydration. Dehydration is already a problem for elderly people. Kathy mentioned earlier that people, when they become older, their body tends to not have that same sense of thirst as it did when they were younger. Maybe it's because they're less active. It's also how the body changes. Nonetheless, people who are experiencing abuse often will show signs of dehydration. And that dehydration also affects one's mental abilities, right? When you experience dehydration, that leads to things like someone's maybe experiencing some hallucinations, they're losing their memory and things like that. A lot of that is connected to dehydration, and proper hydration really does help the brain work a lot better. They're afraid of someone. You know, you have to always be careful about somebody's space, but if they're showing signs of cowering when you're not even trying to come into their space, oh, there seems to be an issue here, right? There seems to be an issue here. Financial fraud. Financial fraud is it is a big issue. I'm sorry to say this, but when you start Googling this and you start realizing how common this is, you have to realize that there's an older generation that they paid off their homes. That was part of the previous generation's values. You pay off your home, you try and save some money. So whether you were, you know, really well off in your older days, or you just had some resources, you did pay off your home often, and that was part of the whole cultural milieu. But now you have the next generation, or the one after, grandkids, who are very demanding of money because they're spending all their money, and they might have an abusive tendency to them. Like, I want my money now, not after you're dead, type thing, or they feel it's owing to them, or mom doesn't really need it anyway, so I should have it. Or maybe they're just worse than that. Financial fraud is really the crime of the current century in a big way. And if you think about the whole cultural situation right now, some of it makes sense why it's become so prevalent, even though it's a horrific thing. Exploitation. And there's also sexual abuse. Could be a neighbor. In the nursing homes, you sadly hear of sexual abuse going on, and this becomes sadly a reality that people don't want to talk about, but it does occur and it does happen. And now the whole thing about sexual abuse probably doesn't come up as self-evident unless you're actually talking to someone, you become a close friend with them, and they become very open to you because you've been kind to them, you've talked to them, you gave them time, and then they might open up and say, well, something terrible has been happening. Well, that might happen. I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying you would ever bump into someone who's telling you about this, but it might happen. Physical abuse is an act of violence that may result in pain, injury, impairment, or disease. Neglect is the failure to provide the goods or services necessary for functioning or to avoid harm. There's a lot of neglect going on within the culture. I talk about this as being a culture of abandonment. I'm not just saying that because I'm thinking that killing is a form of abandonment, which is what I do believe without a question. Killing somebody is not their freedom. No, there's no freedom in killing someone. It's a form of abandonment. Nonetheless, neglect is become a reality. Part of the neglect, they would say, well, we don't have the staff. We don't have the staff to be able to help all these people who need help. So therefore, sadly, there is some neglect occurring. But within a family unit or within, how would you say, the caring of that person, neglect sometimes becomes a reality. And if you notice that, we must help them. I talked about something else in previous presentations, but COVID's starting to lift now. But during the COVID time, a lot of the older people who, let's say they were shut-ins, they lived in their home, we were as a culture shut down in a sense, and we were discouraging people who were elderly from going out because we were afraid that they were going to get sick, that they might be, sadly, because of how the COVID condition went, people who are older tended to be more likely to have a bad outcome from COVID, right? So they were being discouraged. Well, the fact of it is a lot of them were in their homes, and unless someone was actually bringing them things or helping them have their supplies, their food, their things around them, etc. they needed, a lot of them went without for a period of time. Meanwhile, of course, everybody else was going to the grocery store and buying all the toilet paper up. But I mean, having the basement full of it. But the fact of it is that a lot of them experienced that. So as my role in the Knights of Columbus, I was sending out messages across Ontario, and I don't know how many of them really noticed it, saying, have you called your brother Knights and found out if some of your older members have needs? Because you'll find that when you're visiting someone, you might find that they don't have needs. They do have needs that are unfulfilled, and we can help make that a reality. In the same way with financial abuse, I'm not saying that you should do this, but you might decide once every 2 weeks to say, well, when I'm going to the grocery store, is there anything I can pick up for you? Obviously, as a person who is not going to take advantage of them, it would be better that you might pick up something for them, because guess what? If it costs $20 and they have $20, then it's fine. You took care of something they needed, and you're not going out of your way necessarily. Doctor or healthcare is not notified. It's a big sign of elder abuse. If someone let's say someone says they fell down the stairs. Well, did you call the doctor? No, I didn't call the doctor. Well, why wouldn't you call the doctor? Especially if you're older and you're worried about breaks, you might have got, if you actually did fall down the stairs and you just hurt yourself, but you didn't have a break, you came off pretty easy then. But the fact of it is guess what? These are important issues. If you didn't call the doctor, did you actually fall down the stairs? The wound is smelly or dirty, meaning no one's actually caring for them. That's a big sign if that happens. I'm not saying this is going to happen. The person has not received medical care. It's a big sign that there's a possible abuse, certainly neglect. Possible abuse going on. Most injuries, bruises, pressure sores, fractures, these are the kind of things happening because someone is grabbing them or pushing them or in some way pressuring them and using physical nature to do so. Superficial injuries causing an outer layer of skin, these abrasions, they're caused by movement of the skin over a rough surface, and it's evident in both physical abuse and neglect. Okay, so if you're seeing abrasions and issues like that, I'm talking about this is trended here, and you're seeing it, then sometimes there's signs of abuse. These are very difficult things. You might have to come forward and just say, I'm just wondering, is there somebody in your life? I mean, you obviously have to get to know them. Maybe you have somebody else do that and ask questions to them, but we have to somehow intervene. We can't allow a situation of someone who's receiving abuse to continue to be abused. Once again, I'm not talking about this because I think you're absolutely going to fall into this. You're going to be bumping into people with these issues. But if you're visiting or you're talking to people, there's a chance it might happen, and we have to be thinking about it. Bruises happen when a blood vessel ruptures and blood escapes into the surrounding tissue. So you've had an injury, and that's what it is. It's that blood that was surrounded there, and then you can see a bruising. And it may suggest also the cause of injury, the type of bruise there is. A common location of non-accidental injuries are the face and the neck. So if they have bruising around the face and the neck and that kind of thing, and it's consistently happening, good sign of abuse happening, sad sign of abuse happening, I should say. The other thing is that someone might have blood sugar issues that's causing sort of a bruising going on, and this is true. But blood sugar issues are a little different from that. They tend to, not always, it tends to be more on the extremities, meaning they might have ankles that are really, turning color and things like that, because that's how the sugar is not being properly being dealt with in the body, and they're getting ankle injuries, or it shows on their skin around more of their extremities. Bruising tends to be a little bit different from that, but you can see there might be some correlation where someone has blood sugar issues. That's true. Result from tissue exposed to heat above 50 degrees Celsius. So burns we're talking about, categorized by how much the surface area is affected and how deep the damage is. So persons over 65 have double the national death average due to burns. And if you're 75, it's triple. So meaning if you had a serious burn, you're twice as likely to die from it if you're 65 or over, triple the chance of dying from your 75 or over, and quadruple if you're 85. So obviously burns have a great, like the physical effect on a person is far greater if they're older, okay? And burns are a common sign of abuse. Fractures occur when an external force is greater than the strength of the bone is applied. So they've been hit with something. You see a fracture, whether that be a unit of something or whatever it might be. Older people are more susceptible as a result of bone disease or injury. Often an older person might have, their bones are not as strong as a younger person, which is natural because as we age, that certainly changes. Common sites are the hip or the wrist. Elderly people at risk for spontaneous fracture. That's true. This becomes difficult because my mom several years ago broke her wrist, and she had fallen down and she put her arm down and she was to break her fall and she broke her wrist. And then like a year later, she was going down to get her mail and she was walking down because there's these outdoor mailboxes now instead of bringing the mail to your mailbox. Outdoor mailbox, she's going to get her mail, and once again she had fallen and broke her other wrist. That would look pretty bad. In her case, it actually did add up. She called, in both cases, she had called an ambulance. They went to the hospital. These things that happen, but nonetheless, breaks happen more commonly to an older person, and in the case of abuse, it becomes more evident because they've had these breaks. Result of blunt force lacerations, okay, characterized by the full thickness splitting of the skin, so the cutting in the skin, etc. And it's common in physical abuse, but can also occur with neglect. Okay. Pressure sores are caused by inadequate blood supply to maintain proper circulation to the tissue. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people who are in, let's say, the hospital, or they might be in a nursing home, and they are not properly cared for, so they're not being turned regularly, they're being left in one position for a very long period of time, they will develop then pressure sores. Pressure sores can often get infected. That is a form of abuse or neglect. So when you hear of a family member or someone you know that they're in, let's say the hospital, or they're in a nursing home, they're having mobility issues, and now they develop pressure sores, and then they get infections. Sadly, the infections sometimes lead to what? Death. This is definitely a form of neglect or abuse. Now, they often will say to you, well, we don't have the staff. Well, don't give me this. The standard of care for a pressure sore is prevention. And prevention is clearly understood. Proper training is clearly understood. You have to constantly be caring for people. You have to you can't be leaving them in one place all day. You can't be, let's say someone has a situation where they've lost their mobility, they have some, maybe some cognitive issues, and so they need to have a diaper changed. Leaving them in a dirty diaper all day is abuse. And if you leave them in one place in a dirty diaper all day, they might develop then a pressure sore in a very uncomfortable location, and then an infection, and that might lead to death. That to me is absolutely and completely unacceptable and way too common. If you hear that a certain nursing home, oh, it seems that there's a couple of people at that nursing home have pressure sores right now. It's obviously not a home that's providing proper care. I'm very sorry about that. It takes time and energy to care for someone, and these things are necessary. Abuse or neglect occurs when a person is restrained in a non-critical situation. Restraints, to me, are a serious problem. And if you start reading the data on restraints, there are countries that don't allow restraints anymore. Not just saying, oh, this institution has a no restraint policy. There are countries now where they have a no restraint policy, because you have to be capable of providing care without restraints. Now, you may say in certain circumstances, well, that should be, in my opinion, minimal. Restraints are treating someone like an animal. We have to properly be able to care for people without restraining them like that. Is that easy? No. Some people then get abused in another way, with drugs. So we then drug the person because they're too aggressive. So we drug the person. That's a type of thing, chemical restraint. Well, there's also moral issues around chemical restraints. I'm not saying you're going to bump into this. What I'm saying to you is these things, I believe, are part of a culture that needs changing. We don't treat people like that. Not closely monitoring the person with a medical professional. Their restraints are too tight, so then they're restraining them and it's too tight. So then you have the bruising going on. You've got all these problems going on. Restraint is strongly associated with increased injury or death. So they may say we're trying to protect somebody with restraints. That data shows actually using restraints are strongly associated with an increased amount of injury and death, and may result in worsening behaviors. Could you imagine someone who's having some dementia, and so they're a bit too aggressive? So now we restrain them, and how that's going to make them react. Think about that. It's not very good. In sites other than arms or legs or multiple tears, abrasions should certainly raise suspicion. Skin tears here heal without scarring, so they're easily covered up once the healings happen. But if you've a common skin tearing seemingly going on, a high sign of abuse or not being properly treated with malnutrition. Malnutrition has become too common in the culture. I hate to say this to you, but if you read the Quebec report and what's going on in Quebec with Quebec had this commission set up to examine why they had so many COVID deaths of people in nursing homes. Ontario never set up such a commission. British Columbia never set up such a commission. Quebec is the only place in Canada that set up such a commission. And they've had all these witnesses come talking about what was happening and why there were so many people in that nursing home who died by COVID. And what was uncovered is that we had a massive amount of neglect at that time. I'm not saying everywhere. I'm not saying every situation was like that. What I'm saying is a lot of these, you would have a lot of nursing home deaths. What would happen, for instance, is let's say COVID entered that nursing home. You would have a bunch of caregivers decide, I'm afraid of getting COVID. This is early on in the COVID pandemic. You'd have maybe a certain number of caregivers saying, I'm afraid of getting COVID. I've got children at home, etc. They would just stop going to work, and maybe the place was owned by a company that was making it difficult to hire new staff, or maybe it was impossible at the time to hire new staff, etc. And when you look actually at the deaths, a huge number of those deaths were from what? Neglect related to what? Malnutrition, lack of care. Sorry to say it. The Quebec research is really starting to hit us hard. And I'm hoping that the report, it comes out sooner than later. And I'm hoping it's honest, because they've had so many, how would you say, of the witnesses who've come out and saying that this is what's happened. That's what happened. This is what I witnessed. Okay. Not enough staff. That's true. Improper feeding techniques. That's a whole other thing. People will say, well, they've decided not to feed my mother anymore because her dementia's progressed. and they'll call me about that, and I get these calls all the time. And sometimes that person is nearing death. Sometimes they are very nearing death. That this is a situation where the body is really now shutting down. You can't feed or put fluids into a body when they're actually so close to death that they are having those end stages. That's correct. But with proper feeding techniques, if you're still swallowing properly and we can care for someone. You hear the hospital saying, "Oh, your father had sadly pneumonia, and it was related to the fact that they regurgitated with their feeding. So let's say they have some significant dementia going on, etc." The question then comes, well, how did that happen? Well, this is a normal situation. Well, no, it's not a normal situation with proper feeding techniques. It's actually not. That means they didn't properly feed the person, and that was the outcome. That's what it means. These are the realities. There is ways to do this without, if the person still has a swallowing mechanism, etc. Right? Signs and symptoms of dehydration: confusion, sleepiness. They're not just confused and sleepy because they have dementia. They have dehydration. There's a lot of dehydration going on. And you get a situation where they're being dehydrated, and so they're not receiving enough fluids. Now they're acting this way, and someone says, well, there's nothing we can do with them anymore. Well, yes, actually, why don't you give them some ginger ale? Why don't you get them why don't you rehydrate them to the point? And then suddenly, oh, they're feeling a lot better. It's very interesting how common it's become because of the type of care situation we have in the culture right now. And I'm not blaming anybody, because of course it varies. You might go somewhere to this one care home and everyone is being reasonably well cared for, and you go somewhere else where it's not happening. It could be the culture of care in that institution that's the problem. Maybe the staff there they're not a bad people or anything. They have gotten used to a culture of care. It could also be that in someone's home where someone's not being properly cared for. And this could be the reality. Risk factors, medications, and decreased absorption. So obviously when you're dehydrated and then you're receiving medication for something, it will react differently in the body if it's dehydrated than if it's properly hydrated. I always say to people when they ask me about issues around hydration, I always say, well, remember, they don't need a lot of hydration, but they need hydration. They need enough for their body to properly be acting and working. But you don't want to overhydrate someone also, because that causes all kinds of other problems. So they'll say, oh, well, you can't provide hydration in this case. So they talk about sedating somebody and then withdrawing hydration. Of course, what happens is they die within a few days of dehydration. And there's someone's calling me up saying, well, this is what they're saying they want to do with my mom. And I'll say, well, is her body shutting down? Is she actually dying now? Is she actually nearing death? If she is, that's one thing, okay? If you're actually nearing death, that is one thing. But if you're not actually nearing death and you're experiencing other symptom issues, then the response is, well, they can be hydrated, but don't overhydrate them. But they don't need a lot of hydration, but they need hydration. Their body doesn't work properly without it. And then the whole talk about, maybe assisted death is the better way. Like, this is the kind of stuff I'm getting constantly, and it makes me a bit sick. Anyway. And then they say it's all about freedom of choice and autonomy, when really it's all about abandonment. People with dementia, we may not recognize that they're being abused. They may not recognize that they're being abused. They may not be able to report the abuse or talk about it, and they may not be believed. And it's a serious problem. We hear about these things and we say, oh, isn't that terrible? Guess what? Today, because of all the stuff that happened with COVID, and so now they're doing surveys about this, and there's so many people saying, I'd rather be dead than go into a care home, as an example. Well, excuse me, then there's a serious problem with the care homes. I'm not a big believer in care homes, as you know already. I believe in staying in your home. I believe that we should be providing care in the community, compassionate community care. This is what I believe in. I believe that you belong in a community, that's how you're made to be. I believe you are happier in a community because you interact there and your place fits there. Prime example, Mrs. McDonald, who lived across the street from us. She was an elderly lady who lived in that community all of her life. If you had taken her out of the community, would that have been good for her? And I'm not talking about my Genevieve or my Tom now. I'm just sort of saying to you, she had a place in the community. There were people who knew her in the community. She had a purpose in the community. When you take her out of that community, guess what? She loses her identity. She loses her purpose. She loses some of her meaning. I think it's simply wrong that we do that unless we have no choice, meaning sometimes you have to care for somebody in an institution because the family is just not capable of doing it. I'm not saying that's the best situation. I'm just saying it might be the only situation. Companies, dementia, and mental health problems. Yes, self-neglect. Self-neglect is a reality. And you'll see self-neglect, someone who doesn't feel that their life has purpose or meaning or value might lead to self-neglect and makes victims even more vulnerable. Their dependency on others is even worse than when they're experiencing self-neglect. They feel that they're not worthy. You might hear people say, oh, I'm not worthy. No, you're worthy. You're a human being. You're worthy. You're absolutely worthy. Abuse and neglect leads to depression, which often turns to self-neglect. People don't take care of themselves anymore. When you notice someone who they used to always sort of dress nicely, keep themselves clean, they always had their hair done, and now it doesn't seem to matter to them anymore, there's a sign of self-neglect going on. Alcohol abuse. 5% of older persons have alcohol abuse problems. It's more common in men than women, which I think might be changing a bit as the culture has shifted. Lower levels of alcohol to feel ill effects. You know, there's lower levels for an older person. You don't need as much alcohol as an older person to have ill effects. Financial abuse. It is, as they say, the crime of the 21st century. I mentioned that earlier. I don't even, you know, if you guys haven't seen it, you're fortunate, but you know, there's a lot of people I know who've experienced significant financial abuse. They don't stand up to it often because they feel guilty. You have people who have worked hard all their life. They had several children. They absolutely later in life feel guilty because they may have not been the perfect father or the perfect mother, and then they've got a child who's now in their 40s, who's semi-employed, maybe not employed at all, who's constantly taking their money, pressuring them, you know, causing them this difficulty, and they feel guilty, and they're giving it to them, and to the point where they have nothing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sharing your finances with somebody. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with sharing your finances. But when abuse is occurring, that's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother story. And this has become very common. When you see someone who obviously they and their husband, they did well in their life. They worked hard. They accumulated some resources, and now they're in their 80s and they have absolutely nothing left over. Ooh, you know, there's something going on there. And it's not just bad investing. It could actually be a gambling problem. It could be. So compassionate community care. Here's the information about compassionate community care. Info at Being With is the email. You can there's our charitable registration number. And if you have any questions, we have a fair amount of time for questions. It's 1:42. So once again, there's several chat questions here. Kathy has unmuted herself, so we can start dealing with those. Compassionate community care is totally donation based, but of course, it just for your information, the federal government did provide money to develop the My Story booklet and the My Story program. And then the advocacy program that we're working on right now, the federal government did provide funding for that. So the whole concept of the advocacy program, the Ministry of for Seniors recognized that they thought that was probably a good idea, and they did provide some funding towards that. But the original idea for this training was that we would charge everybody finance costs and everything to be part of the training. And I'm thinking that's not necessary. You know, to tell you the truth, there's quite a few people who have recognized that what Compassionate Community Care is doing is good, and they're making donations towards it. And because there's donations coming in, there's no reason why we can't train people, as I say, literally at no cost, because the fact is other people are saying, that's a good program, we're supporting that, and that gives you the freedom to do what you need to do. We employ Kathy, and I think that's an amazingly good investment. And the fact of it is that that's how the whole thing works. People are making donations, and it's happening that way. If you make a donation, there's a charitable registration number. And I'm going to stop the share. And now we're once again open to questions. There's some in the chat. Kathy, do you want to look at that?
Yes, there is one in particular. A lady asked if in case of someone becoming aggressive, how do you treat someone that is very aggressive?
Well, the difficulty with being aggressive is it does vary, right? So right off the bat, but the fact of it is that usually they're aggressive because out there having some dementia, they're having other issues and control things. There is no easy answer to this. I do suggest, though, that there are communities now. So they have whole, as I say, there's whole places that have now become totally restraint free. And what they're doing is they're recognizing that there's other ways. Sometimes you might have to have that person then be in a room on their own, etc. There might be other ways to deal with it. I'll give you another thing. None of these issues are easy because, for instance, in a nursing home, there might be some sexual abuse that goes on too. This is a whole nother problem. So there might be somebody who is a staff member, but it might also be another person living in the nursing home who's doing this to other people. And so once again, it's all about training and awareness how you properly try and care for people, because you have to prevent this from happening, right? I don't have any easy, I'm not going to say to you, I'm an expert. What I'm going to say to you is the concept of restraints, though, is also abusive. And you may say it's easy for you to say, Alex, and I'd say, well, fine and dandy. But nonetheless, I believe as human beings, we don't tie people up. We don't treat people like that. So, you know, but at the same time, I'm the guy who's not big into nursing homes either. I believe you keep your house if you can, or we move to an apartment if you can't keep your house, and try and get some home care. And if you're having some difficulties, try and work with your friends a bit to help with your resources to make sure that you have the things you need. But you're far better off in your community, if you can be, than you are segregating yourself into some sort of care home and releasing yourself out of your regular community. That doesn't make, to me, that doesn't fulfill the nature of the human person. We identify with, and we, how would you say, we bond to our place of being. Right? We identify with it. That's how we are as humans. And when we pull ourselves out of that, we start changing what we are as a human being. And as I say, it makes us less likely to have a feeling of value for ourselves. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. If anyone has other questions, please raise your hands, or you can write them in the chats. I don't see any until now. So if anyone else has a question, please feel free to raise your hand or chat. There's a comment here from Colleen. This care is so in need in our society, existing healthcare systems. Yes, it is absolutely very necessary. And there's so many cases we hear of, Colleen, especially where I just spoke to someone on during the week where they felt that they their own family members were being neglected and that they might have been euthanized. So this is something that's becoming more and more common. We're seeing our thing.
I get calls like this all the time. We have a message from Adele here. Said you spend time with them. This is about the aggression. You spend time with them and try to find out what's causing the aggression. It may be a physical need. It may be a bathroom needs, fluids they might need, or clothing, or someone to talk to, or something that they need. They're feeling the need. I need. So I'm not saying that there's and none of these things. Like, I'm not going to say there's any easy answer to anything, but I do point out that the concept of restraints to me does not make sense when you're dealing with a human person. I knew of a woman who was she was a Jewish woman, and I was contacted by her daughter because of how she was being treated in a nursing home, and and her difficulty was related to the fact that she had gone through a concentration camp in her very young years of life, and so later in life when she was having some cognitive issues, she had a lot of emotional and psychological trauma going on. So I don't think, when you're dealing with that kind of thing, then, how you treat them is so essential, knowing that they experience such abuse in their younger years. Adele also makes a comment about a lot of seniors are targeted by scams. The funny thing is, as a senior, someone might feel like they're, how would you say, They're looking, they're more trusting. They might be more trusting, and they may not fully understand the issue of what someone's trying to do to them when they're scamming them. So that becomes an issue right off the bat, where they seem to be easier to scam. I don't know. I agree that we should be encouraging that. Absolutely, yes. If you're visiting, as an example, a CWL lady who you've met before or who's been sort of known to you before, and there's a bit of a relationship there, that's one issue. But if you're visiting somebody you've never met before, it's always better to go in twos. But with COVID, it's been more of a difficulty now. But I do agree that twos are always better, absolutely. And it protects you, but it also protects the other person, right? And we want to make sure there's no issues. We want to make sure that you've done your security check. We want to make sure that you've had enough training that there's something that you notice that it could be a serious problem, and it's consistently noticing this serious problem that you're actually realizing that you have to do something about it. But at the same time, yes, twos are always better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's also a comment here. It's scary to choose euthanasia because you feel like you are losing your dignity. And there's some personal feedback stories as well. For any one of you who have a personal story of a family member or relative who want to share this and draw awareness to it, maybe you feel that there is more healing that can happen for others too, or just drawing awareness to this elder abuse factor, we could definitely take submissions like this and incorporate it into our other, mailings and information. I think it's really important to highlight to what degree abuses are occurring. And I'm seeing in the chat private messages where a lot of people have been sharing throughout the day today how they've been affected. So if you are comfortable with that, we can keep it obviously confidential, or if you want to share, we could always share it as an anonymous person sharing their story of someone else's experience. And this at least will draw awareness. It will really open people's eyes. And I think it's impactful because people will see how significant this issue is. For all of you who join us today, we definitely want to encourage you to encourage your members, your contacts, your friends, any CWL members that you know of that can help others too, and widen this reach that we're encouraging today. Doing the My Story program, or even just meeting with people. I've had great feedback today, by the way, from some of you who said that they personally want to start, they're starting a citywide compassionate care group, making contact with long-term care facilities about receiving names of people open to visits. They will need some help, maybe some support, and we will definitely encourage you and help them with that. So if that's something that's on your heart or in your mind, please definitely reach out. We can assist you with that. Like Alex said, My Story books are available. We have many copies at the office. We want to get these out to you. So just let us know how many you need and we'll ship them to you. We are collecting the stories, so it's important that you send your submission form and your permission form, which is in the book, and it's also on our, it's electronically was delivered to you in the email, and that's really imperative if you want their story to be shared in our publication, in our report, both back to the government, but also just for the 100th anniversary edition. Just for a note here, we do have these handy cards as well. For any of you that are experiencing any kind of situation, or someone comes to you with an issue of elder abuse, these are our little business cards. We can actually ship these out to you, and you can share these with your communities and CWL groups. It has the telephone number, which is confidential and free. It's a wonderful service, so dedicated and so important. And for those who would like also, we also are focusing on these forms. So submissions are coming in. We definitely want to include those. And if you have any questions, reach out. We are here and available for you. So thank you so much for joining us.
And if you have any suggestions, we're happy to take them. It's not like we think that we know everything in the world. In fact, what is good about it is actually a couple of presentations ago, we had a bunch of ladies who had been heavily involved with visiting already, such as Adele has said she's been doing. And they shared their stories with us, and that was helpful also. In any way that we can help, we're committed to working with people. And thank you very much.